Hello, Krellin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's stream. My name is Ariana. I am the co-director of the Consent Academy, a Seattle-based nonprofit that aims to promote consent culture as part of everyday life. I am tired today, but it's okay. I'm often tired, different type of tired than usual, but I'm excited to be here. Lots of fun things I want to talk about, lots of fun things that we can talk about. It's all good. I would love to know how you all are doing today. Anybody have anything interesting happen? It's been just over a week, 2 weeks since the last time we talked. I don't remember. I'll have to check to make sure I didn't lose any of the recordings. Anyway, been few times around the sun, or the sun around us. Days. Sun has gone up and down a few times. That's what I'm trying to say. Since the last time we talked. So anyway, yeah, I'm tired today. I also need to lower my table. No, other direction. Other direction. There we go. There we go. Now that's a normal height. Okay, let's start. I've got some memes. I've got some articles and some resources. And I keep reconnecting to the chat room, so I might be missing messages. Who knows? Anyway, as usual, I'm excited to be here. I hope everything's okay. Not getting great kilobits per second, but it is saying it's only using 4% of my CPU. We're going to assume that it's okay. Anyway, memes. This first meme here is very cute. It made me laugh. You see SpongeBob here in a hospital bed, looking pretty broken up and unhappy. Looks like he's I don't know what sponges fluids look like, but it looks like hyaluron transfusion, and it says, okay, I'm glad. If I missed them, then you did too, Krellin. Do you want to try nurse and patient role play tonight? Me when she just leaves me alone in a hallway for hours. I was recently at the hospital and I saw a lot of people in beds just in the hallway for hours. And so it was very funny. Accurate. That's also been my experience as a hospital patient many times. I've also been just sort of left somewhere for long periods of time, but it usually is a good sign. Well, it's mixed, right? Like the hospitals usually means if it's got more patients than it has rooms, or not enough staff to manage everything, or there's something else kind of not great on the planning side. But it also usually means that you're okay. Sometimes people get discharged from the hospital too before they feel like they're ready. People are like, oh, I'm like so sick. Why am I being discharged? And it's also pretty common for them to discharge you once you've stabilized. Like, can you breathe on your own? Are you conscious? Can you swallow? Can you feed yourself? Can you toilet? If any of, especially if the breathing and the swallowing are true and you're not like hemorrhaging or anything like that, a lot of the time they can just send you home because you're fine. But because they don't give a lot of that information, because they don't necessarily, like, I've had friends who've had really bad medical issues going on, or a loved one did, and then the hospital discharged them and they felt, oh my goodness, but this person's not better. I'm so confused. And a lot of the time I think about how it would be really improved if communication and medical education of patients and family members of patients were a little bit better, to explain to people, hey, here's the exact law. It like takes 5 seconds, right? Someone has a stroke and they get discharged and people are like, okay, but like they're still going to need to recover for a long time. I don't understand why you're sending them home. And if it's the same criteria, are they breathing on their own? Can they swallow? You don't have a risk of aspirating, which is getting fluid into your lungs, and then that can cause pneumonia, which can kill you. If you can swallow correctly, if the stroke didn't impact your ability to properly recruit the muscles for swallowing in the right order, or you're able to signal to start the process and you're able to breathe. Those two things right there are, and the bleeding that caused the stroke, or if it was a blood clot, the blood clots resolved. There's different types of strokes. And you're not like, there's no brain swelling, there's no anything else. Like, yeah, you can go home and recuperate at home. And often the motivation there is too, because hospitals, you run the longer you stay in them, the more risk you have of also picking up other things. There have been really interesting studies just of like ventilation systems in hospitals and how sort of circulatory system of air ventilation in a hospital can sometimes create like colonies of certain bacteria or viruses or fungi that become opportunistic infections, which is where you have one health problem going on, and then a pathogen that can cause any kind of infection then has an opportunity to get into your body and establish itself when it otherwise likely would not. And so not keeping you in the hospital unnecessarily is often a good thing, but they don't tell you that. Or they don't tell people this kind of stuff often of like, what is the actual reasoning for why you're in terrible pain or something's gone really wrong, but you don't need to stay in the hospital? Or what is the reasoning for why it's okay that we're going to just leave you in this hallway for a while, and that like you don't need to be hooked up to more machines than you. I think a lot of the times movies and TV shows that depict hospitalization also really give this idea that like proper medical care looks a certain way, like a nurse or two who are jolly and like very personable and have time to chat with you, being there kind of all the time, and a million different machines, and it's really quiet and like whatever. And like those are sound stages. Those are not actually nurses. Nurses usually have a miserable job if they're in a high stress situation, like ER nurses. I know because my mom has worked as an ER nurse. Um, and I know a lot of other people who are nurses. My stepfather is also a nurse. Many people in my family's orbit are medical professionals. You get spit at, you get bit, you get poop thrown at you, you get people who are hostile or belligerent. Nursing is a tough job. And so, and they probably, if they're not paying a ton of attention to you, that sometimes is malpractice, for sure. I personally have experienced a hospital almost killing me because they didn't listen to me and they assumed, oh, you just have a UTI, and then I went into sepsis and organ failure and almost died and spent like 2 weeks in the ICU of Children's Hospital. And that was like medical malpractice. Like they just kind of forgot about me and didn't take my pain very seriously. They thought I just had a UTI that had gone up to a kidney infection. That is not at all what happened. I had a kidney stone that blocked everything, caused a kidney infection that then progressed to a UTI. Anyway, long story. They didn't take my pain seriously. They thought I was exaggerating. I was in multi-organ failure and sepsis, and they almost killed me because they did some stupid things. But at the same time, when things are going well, if the nurses aren't like always on top of you, that usually means things are kind of okay. Anyway, I see some stuff in the chat, so I really like your joke, Krellin. I'm not an animal. And then response, if you get salty enough about it, you might be a mineral. I like it. Hi, Paladin Hulk. Yeah, they do go through a lot of hall passes. Aradin, I can hear you fine, but your video is pretty much a slideshow on my end. Yeah, Krellin, you're being discharged because they don't have enough room for your sick butt. That can also be true. They don't have enough room and they have to prioritize who they think is the most likely to decline, or who's going to be the most likely to not do well, say at home, who needs the most help. And they make mistakes for sure. And hey, Reverend Mort. Also, it's a slideshow. Choppy video. Let me see. Let me see. Yes. There we go. That should be a lot better. Hi, Silly Millie. Welcome. It's nice to see you. Um, yeah, this should be a lot better. Okay. Yes. It was my mistake. I had my VPN set to somewhere silly rather than someplace logical. Uh, because there was an article I wanted to read and it wouldn't let me access it unless I was in the US, which I'm not. So I used my VPN. But since I've already loaded the article, hopefully it's fine. But that's why it was so laggy. Anyway, better. Okay. So this meme, we talked about it. I think that a lot of stress would be relieved if medical professionals were a little bit better at communicating medical sort of education and explaining decision making. Um, and just sort of like letting you know, hey, here's the honest reasons about, say, why we're discharging you, or here's why. Like, yes, if you're just being left in a hallway, it means there's not enough space, always. And yes, Aradin, uh, geolocking can be very annoying. And you can actually read the meme. Okay, good. Wonderful. All right, next one. This is a tweet from @CoolAuntV. Thinking about the time I found a box of my parents' basement that was full of wigs and sunglasses and hats and stuff. And when I asked my mom about it, she was just like, sometimes you need to do surveillance, and refused to elaborate. I just think that's funny. Especially because I think about how I have a huge chest full of costumes and like things for performance stuff, and that when my kids are in their late teens, it'll be pretty funny for them to think about. Paladin Hulk, quote, we're not helping you because you're disabled, and therefore the medical community, we the medical community, yeah, value your life less, or sadly if you're a woman. Yes, absolutely, these things are also true. And that would be difficult to get people to admit. I don't think they really would. That moment, yes, forever. I think that's also probably true. You're ashamed of your old cosplay that you pretend your wigs are for spy stuff. I'm not ashamed of my old cosplay. None of it was ever very good because I don't know how to sew. So I would just try to fake it a lot. Um, but I enjoyed the I'm a baby cosplayer period of my life where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And this is my first anime convention. And I'm just so excited. Anime Boston. Oh my God. And then I was just wearing like whatever. That wasn't even a reference to a show. I was just like, this kind of makes me look like a character from an anime. That's good enough. That was my first one. It was just like a pleated skirt and knee-high socks and like a sailor shirt. And I was like, there, I look like I'm from an anime. Amazing. And I put like ribbons in my hair and stuff. And I think I had like a backpack that was Mr. Bubble or something, the Bubble Bath Company. And it's great. Yeah, my sewing skills are only so. I love it. Um, Yeah, exactly, Revermore. I look like I'm from 80% of all anime. A lot of people were like, "Oh, you're this character, aren't you?" And I was like, "Nope, I'm just me. I'm just me being a weeb." Um, anyway, hoping to talk to the voice actress who plays Asuka from Evangelion, even though, okay, the English dub is very good with Ava. It's one of those ones where I can watch it either way. But I did watch it originally in Japanese. Yep. Yeah. Yes. And I think that it's really, yeah. Anyway, it's fun. Also, it has occurred to me, I need to figure out through a plugin or something how to make it so that the chat also shows up on the stream. Because I realize when I export videos to things like YouTube, the chat replay doesn't go with it. And I usually try to read people's chat messages out loud as one, just to be more accessible to people who can't see or not going to watch the screen or are listening instead, just general accessibility. But then also, I realized it would be nice for people to be able to actually see chat. Um, And Arata, and you say, yeah, I watched Neon Genesis Evangelion in English. And Reverend Moore, I figure sub or dub is probably a bit of a pointless debate when you're adding OG audio to your options. Yes. Um, I would also say that I'm not a purist. I'm not the kind of person who's like, if you don't watch it in Japanese, you are a plebe. No, not at all. I think that everyone should watch it, whatever makes them happy. There are some choices that they've made in some dubs, like Naruto, where they translated databayo, which is kind of like a meaningless phrase that is just like, I don't know. And like there's a lot of copulas in Japanese, just things that signify the end of a sentence, like des, that are not actually, they only function to say, hey, the end of the sentence is here. And there's a lot of colloquialisms that are variations on it. So it's actually kind of a meaningless sentence. And like, for example, data is just like the past of des, but it's a casual past. And yo is kind of an ending that means like, you know, like I could say like kawaii yo, like oh, like my friend saying, oh, I'm so ugly, and I'm like, no, you're so cute, you know. And then they translated that into believe it, and like that kind of hurt me. I was like, this makes the character Naruto sound a lot more absurd and less cutesy than he was in Japanese. So sometimes I felt I had some opinions on occasion, but for the most part, I was like, whatever's good. I think that I miss the days when a lot of things were dubbed when they found people who were like profession in animation in general, professional voice actors and actresses versus now where they take a lot of famous actors and actresses but who don't primarily work in voice and just have them do it because they're really iconic. And I think there's often something missing. Like voice acting, I think, is a really different, in many ways, skill set than live acting. Just like how acting in theater is a different sort of skill set than acting in film and television. There's a lot of overlap for sure, but there's subtleties that really elevate a performance, in my humble opinion. Um, and okay, uh, Araden, you say, yeah, Naruto is painful in English. And Krellin, you did quote, believe it, I roll. And Revermort, translation is an art. Not all people who paint do art. People who want an artist sometimes hire painters. Yeah, I agree. I would definitely agree that it's an art. And I would say that, like, I think there are good reasons for why there are, like, international awards for translation work. Because to really capture, say, like, a book, like one of my bachelor's degrees is in Japanese. Language, linguistics, and literature, or like culture, linguistics, and literature, I guess is a better way to say it. And a lot of my like junior year writing project, it had to be like translations of some different works. And it was really fun. I got to translate a bunch of different things, and they were really nice projects, and just sort of capturing the spirit of, say, like a character and making sure it translates well into Japanese or into English was really difficult. And it's fun to be a language nerd and then read stories that I really like in different languages. Like the first time I read The Hobbit in English, I found that I didn't like Gandalf. Somehow Gandalf really rubbed me the wrong way when I was like 13 reading The Hobbit. But then I read The Hobbit in French, and somehow Gandalf came off a lot nicer to me in French. Like the way Gandalf speaks in English, I'm kind of like, this guy seems kind of a bit of a know it all asshole who doesn't disclose information and puts people in danger. And even though those things were true, somehow the manner in which Gandalf was saying things in French came off less of a know it all and more like, I can't see clearly all of the future's mysteries. And somehow it like had a different quality to it. I don't know. Um, oh my goodness. Okay. Silly Millie, you said translation is bloody hard. As someone who did it as a job for a while, I'd love to know more about what kind of translation you did. Reverend Mort, I mean, I missed the first anime where they didn't get professional voice actors, but just random people from The Office. Yeah, those were also special in their own way. Um, and special in their own way. I think there were some really good ones that I can think of. There was a movie called A Wind Named Amnesia. Absolute ridiculous movie. Genuinely absurd, but the voice acting was fun. The whole thing is fun. If you want to watch something really weird and weird and like not weird and like Perfect Blue is a weird anime movie, but weird and just it's weird. A Wind Named Amnesia is pretty interesting. Okay. Paladin Hulk, if you think translation is difficult, I've never heard of someone being good at cislation. Okay, I love it. Krellin, my favorite dubism is that talent now means boobs because Sailor Jupiter insisted she should be the star in the play in the dub because she had the most talent. In Japanese, it was because she had the biggest boobs. Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that changed in the dubs to fit American sort of uh, sex negative, body shame-tastic sensibilities. And it's unfortunate, but funny. Aradin, to be fair, he kind of is in The Hobbit. Reverend Mort, know-it-all asshole who doesn't disclose things and puts people into danger. A wizard. The word you're looking for is a wizard. I played D&D. That's definitely a wizard. Yeah, for sure. Um, Not every wizard. Some wizards are just nerds. Okay, Aradin, are you sure that isn't a rogue though? And then emoji with the tongue sticking out, and that also could be true. Silly Millie, I was an Arabic linguist for the U.S. military for 5 years. That's awesome. That's really cool. What dialect of Arabic or what dialects of Arabic were you sort of primarily working in? I would love to learn Arabic. I think it sounds beautiful. I like the rhythm of it very, very much. All right, let's move on to the next meme. This is at Sketches by Bose on Twitter. Kids today are like, so what did y'all do before the internet? Did you just not know anything? And the answer is yes. You would ask your Aunt Marge a question. She'd give you the wrong answer, and you'd carry that misinformation for 20 years. And I just want to be just refer back to all of these ridiculous things people used to say with a ton of confidence. This is not a problem caused by the internet. This is a problem that exists forever. And then this is actually, I think, a really good summary of a really common problem. And I really like how succinctly it's summarized here. And it's from at Miss Kate Charm. The American radicalization pipeline for teenage boys. 1, searches for how to attract women and why you feel lonely leads to red pill and pickup artist communities. 2, angry men online claim to be privy to secret truths about how everything is a lie designed to imprison. Now, the thing is, starting with these two things, it is normal for people to be like, to say they feel lonely and to want to attract a romantic partner if there's someone who experiences romantic or sexual desire. These are very normal things. And it's normal. We don't have, as we sort of talked about a lot with the Surviving the Future book and cultural myth making and senses of belonging, we don't really teach people about these things. We don't teach people how to be dateable or someone people want to sleep with or someone wants to be a life partner with. We don't teach people how to have healthy relationships. We don't even teach people things like how to break up in a consensual manner. Just in case you were wondering, Consent Academy is working on a class series specifically on all of those topics. As an expansion to the 102 level of our relationship skills. And that's what we want to sort of add to that is these kinds of questions. But without having good skills at this, a lot of people flounder. It's normal. And There's also the pressures of capitalism. Not everybody can afford to dress nicely, to go to the gym, to, whatever. Not everybody wants to attract somebody in those ways either, which is also completely valid. There's a million reasons why people fail to find partnerships and also fail to find friendships. And people are pretty chronically lonely. I struggled with loneliness for a very, very, very long time. And a lot of it had to do with ADHD and people not really liking ADHD people very well. And like social understandings and like social psychological development in people with ADHD have major delays. And there were also just aspects of my personality that needed work. And there were things related to trauma or stress or just like maladaptation that I had. And I had to really work on it to become the kind of person who could really have good friendships and relationships. And I had to really figure it out on my own. Like, some of it was getting good therapy, some of it was just my brain maturing more, some of it was trial by fire, learning from bad life experiences. But it doesn't have to be that rough. We could teach people in schools these skills, and we don't. So then you have the second part here. The people online claim to be privy to secret truths about everything is a lie designed to imprison you. And this point is rough because it's also not exactly wrong. A lot of things are basically lies designed to imprison us. Like, a lot of modern education isn't actually about expanding your understanding of reality or teaching you essential life skills. It's about teaching you conformity and how to obey rules and unspoken expectations. And that's why a lot of people who have deficits or delays in social functioning tend to do really poor in school, regardless of intelligence or academic capacity. And so it's very, very, very relevant. Just one small thing, but by the time a person is searching for this information online, they've probably had a lot of real life experiences with system that is not, that tells them here's how to be rewarded in the system. They do what they can to get that. It doesn't work, and then they feel trapped because they are. And then the next point here, boys are encouraged to hate others who have taken from them the life they should have had. The women of their dreams was stolen. So this is where the things really go haywire. These first two things are not necessarily bad in the sense that we don't have any rituals for coming of age. We don't teach people things. It can't really be helped then, or it's not surprising then that people are chronically lonely. Then people talking about real issues in the world as it is, but then directing it at individuals rather than systemic failures, because it's a lot easier to point to a small problem or a non-problem like the existence of, whatever minority group, and target your feelings at that, because in some ways you can't do anything about that. In other ways, it's something you can really psychologically distance yourself from. It's an easy target. You can just sort of fling all of your rage at it. But then if we were to talk about like restructuring how we organize society and how we, transition people from childhood to adulthood, and how we, construct our economic systems to allow people the time to work on self-development in whatever capacity, et cetera, et cetera. That's a lot scarier. It's a lot harder. That requires a lot of hard work from pretty much everybody for a very long time before we really see very many results. And people don't agree on this. We don't have the resources at the community level for a lot of these changes. So it's, I think, easier for a lot of people to feel angry at a specter than to actually deal with the thing that's happening. So it continues here. Everybody becomes the enemy: women, Black people, Jewish people, trans people, etc. And then, so what are you going to do about it? Better get an AR-15. I think this is a pretty common thing, because if you have, people also need to feel autonomy and agency. We need to have the access to our right to autonomy, and we need to have agency, the ability to actually act with our autonomy. And when we don't have that, when we're chronically disempowered, when we're basically being lied to all the time, etc., etc., when we don't have a lot of power over our own lives and what happens to us, that is really demoralizing and frustrating. And that feeling of powerlessness gives eventually. And for a lot of people, they grasp onto things that then make them feel powerful, whether it's road rage and reckless, aggressive driving, whether it's having a lot of guns and feeling empowered. I remember a tweet that went around at the early pandemic where someone took a photograph of their gun locker and said, I'm pretty sure I can buy toilet paper anytime I want to. And then the tweet said, like, screenshotted it and quoted it and said, killing people so I can wipe my ass. And the thing is, I think for a lot of people, there's a disconnect there about the idea of like, what do these guns then actually mean and what they're for? And for them, it just represents a symbol of I have power over my own life, which is a very reasonable thing to want to have and something a lot of us are chronically denied. And yet, that line of logic is terrifying. Okay, I would love to read more of the chat. And then Reverend Mort, to be fair, this is a problem greatly alleviated by the internet because access to information means people are more likely to be correct about things they're certain about, and more kids are less likely to just ask and just Google instead. Yeah, I agree with you. Silly Millie, I was taught by Egyptians, Syrians, Lebanese, and Iraqis. I specifically learned Modern Standard Arabic and Libyan dialects. Nice, nice, very cool. I only know a handful of words in Arabic. Most of them are the words that are English but Arabic, like algebra, alcohol, things like that. And I know the word habibi because I got called it a lot when I went to Qatar. And it means baby, as far as I understand it. Paladin Hulk, no woman is worth going to the gym. I love it. Aradin, you point at yourself and then you say ADHD plus depression slash self-doubt. Not a great combo for making friends. It's very true. Silly Millie, I still struggle with loneliness. I'm basically a shut-in. Paladin Hulk, same. Yeah, I mean, I also hard relate to this. I'm a weird internet weirdo recluse who's also a super extrovert, but like, I struggle. Some of it used to be because of mental health issues that I was dealing with, where I had a lot of trauma and I was afraid to leave the house because of that trauma. I'm past that now, but there are still aspects where my brain goes like, what if we just didn't leave the house? That's better. I also, as a result of ADHD, and this is the much bigger thing, have a difficulty with state changes. So sometimes I can't ever focus and settle down into one activity, but once I'm in an activity, it's very hard for me to change my state. So like if I'm sitting at my desk, no longer sitting at my desk becomes difficult. If I'm out for a walk, ending the walk and going home becomes difficult because my brain does this thing where there's only now and not now in terms of time, and there's only this activity and other and like not this activity. And so when if I'm going for a walk, I'm like, I've only ever been walking, and why would I ever stop walking? But if I want to go for a walk, getting to the transition to leaving the house becomes incredibly difficult, and sometimes it doesn't work. So I definitely relate hard. And Krellin, and some of us never figure it out and just accept we're broken and unfuckable. Yeah, and I mean, I think that being fuckable and being dateable and being sort of like life partnerable are all different skill sets at the same time. I've met a lot of people who were very, very fuckable, but I would never have wanted to have a life with that person. Or I've had people who I'm like, I would love to have a life with this person, but if this is my life partner, I will never have children because there's no way in hell I would want to raise children with this person. Like, I love them. They're great. They're fantastic. We have a lot of fun together. No, not children. And that was not a problem for me because I'm very much like, would love to have them. Also, don't necessarily want to have them. Like, I kind of feel pretty equal in both directions. And I would always think about how do I feel about this then? How do I feel about maybe not having kids with this person. And I think that we part of the reason why I'm talking about this is because we also have this myth around things like friendships, where a friend is supposed to kind of be everything, or a romantic partner is supposed to be everything. Like a friend should be a person you go to for advice, somebody who helps you move, somebody who you have fun with, someone who's a confidant, someone who does this, that, and the other. And if someone doesn't kind of meet all of these categories, we don't tend to prioritize or develop the friendship very much. And I think that's really unhealthy because one, it causes us to discount a lot of different types of friendship. And it also causes us to have fewer friends overall. I've had friends where I love playing board games with them. They are great fun to play board games with. We get along really, really well when it comes to board games. And I don't want to talk to them otherwise because I don't really like them that much outside of that context, and they don't really seem to like me that much outside of the context. We don't have a lot of common. Our approach to the world is so different that it tends to like stress each other out and grade at each other. I don't even like going to their house because their sort of sense of cleanliness is too different from mine. But if we meet at a party where it's a board game party, we're going to have a great time. I'm going to like playing a board game with them. And I still consider those people my friends. And that was fine. Where I was just like, I like you in these contexts. I also have friends where like we really vibe with each other when we're doing like the deep soul searching. Let's talk about like, the worst things that have ever happened to us, or our deepest desires, or like secret shames that we have, or like our dreams. And we really are good at holding space for each other. We're really good at connecting with each other. And then otherwise, we're just kind of like, yeah, like ships passing in the night, as they say, except in this one thing. And I think it's okay. And I also think it's okay for someone's romantic partner to not be everything to them all the time in every context, right? There are most of the time, I want Charlie to be there to be the person to support me through something. I want to talk about problems with Charlie, like my own life problems, my own life stresses. I would like to talk to him. But there are times where he's not the right person for that. There are times where I would rather talk to a family member, or, I mean, he's my family, but, or certain friends of mine, because I feel like they are going to offer me insight, or the way that they're going to support me is going to be more what I need. And it's not a problem, but for a lot of people, they would see that as a problem. And I think that this also exacerbates it. Okay, continuing. Aradin, oh, I don't go out anymore, but I generally get enough social interaction online to keep it from being too lonely these days. And yeah, I get all my social interaction is online, basically. And I like it because it also helps a lot with that state change problem. If I don't have to leave my house to hang out with my friends, it's great. Reverend Mort, you said one part of just go to the gym and get swole to get laid, red pill advice that makes me sad is that attracts the sort of people who are into swole people, which is usually not the sort of person they wanted to or needed to attract as to feel happy. So they just continue to be miserable and keep trying to validate themselves with toxic masculinity. Yeah, I mean, it really breaks my heart. I absolutely agree with you. It breaks my heart because, like, for one, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be big and strong. There's nothing wrong with wanting to like sculpt your body, like people who are bodybuilders. I used to do bodybuilding for a brief period of time. And didn't really get sculpted like I wanted to, but I got ridiculously strong. Like people didn't expect someone who's only 5 feet tall to be that strong. So they would see me lift something and then assume that they could lift it and like hurt themselves. And like for most of my relationship, I've been physically stronger than Charlie. I tend to hold on to muscle. I like being strong. And I think that it can become unhealthy. It can become its own kind of eating disorder and everything, as we've talked about before. But I also think that people have this idea. How do I want to say this? Early in my relationship with Charlie, when I first moved to Seattle, there were some people who were friends with Charlie who assumed I was a gold digger because of the fact that, for a lot of offensive reasons, basically, Now, Charlie's not wealthy, is not likely to be wealthy. He's an academic. But, getting a PhD in physics, if he wanted to go a certain type of route, he could make a lot of money in industry. Not the kind of life Charlie or I want. Um, but anyway, basically, because Charlie is really nerdy and doesn't fit a lot of stereotypical American masculinity, whereas I do pass a lot of stereotypical American femininity ideals. And whatever people assumed, the only reason why I would date Charlie is because I'm some kind of gold digger. And I was like, literally, no. And I was like, that's also hilarious because I was like, had just been homeless, like right before people said that to me. And I was like, I have a safe place to sleep and a warm bed. Like, that's more than enough for me. Like, I'm okay. I don't need a rich person. Wouldn't want to date a rich person anyway. But, you know, the point I'm trying to make here is that the kind of person you actually want to be with is going to have nothing to do with like likely have nothing to do with the standards of like beauty or attractiveness or desirability. It has so much more to do with like, do we have the same set of values? Do we both want to have the same kind of life? Like, I was really interested with Charlie about asking the unsexy questions a lot at the beginning. Like, what do you think is a reasonable amount of money to spend on a pair of shoes or a haircut or a new sofa? Because I needed to know, do we have the same perspectives about money? Because money stress is a huge stress in life and it hurts a lot of relationships. I'm very much of the mind, I don't want to buy really cheap shoes because they tend to fall apart. I would rather save up money and buy a pair of shoes that's not expensive. I'm not going to go buy like Jimmy Choo's or something or Louboutins. I'm not that kind of person. I don't have that kind of money, nor would I want to save up for that. But I will buy a pair of, say, Clarks that cost $100, $150. Why? Because those shoes are going to last me 10 years or longer, especially if I take care of them at all. I'm very much of that mind of like, I would rather spend a little bit more for something that I really like and that's going to last me a long time. But I've dated people or for them, ever spending more than $20 on a pair of shoes meant that you were really shallow and superfluous and silly and was stressful to them. And I couldn't be with those kinds of people long term because we were too different in our value system. I like to buy mostly antique furniture. One, because often it's very affordable. You're not going to like bougie antique stores. If you're getting it on secondhand marketplaces, flea markets, yard sales, because it tends to be really well made and it tends to last. And I'm like, if it could last 100 years, it's going to survive me. Um, and generally speaking, that has been true. And for other people, that's not a good combination. And it's okay for there to be some differences, but like those fundamental things, people don't really ask those questions. And people are also really afraid, on a sort of related but opposite note, people are often afraid to break up, even when it's really clear that they have such a different worldview and value system, because the sex is really good, or the dating is fun, or they're afraid of being alone. And I can tell you, having been in a lot of shit relationships, being alone is often preferable to being in a relationship where you have to regularly sacrifice your self respect in order to keep it going. That's all I'm going to say. And Araden, you said also, I think the fact that society has spent years downplaying friendship or outright saying it is something to avoid in favor of romantic relationships plays a role in a lot of this. 100%. 100%. And friendships, I would say, are just as important. There's a difference between like, this is the person I'm organizing my life with, whether it's a platonic partnership or a romantic partnership. You're always going to have to prioritize that to a certain extent because that relationship takes maintenance, it takes upkeep, it takes investment. That's what people mean when they say it takes work. And prioritization. So, like, Charlie and I take a lot of time to make sure, even when we're having to do a lot of extra work, when we're really stressed and busy at work, we take time every day for each other to really be there with each other. so that we never forget to do that. And at the same time, though, we both really push each other to maintain friendships, to invest in friendships, etc. Important. Reverend Mort, I wish they got angry at actual literal specters. Being angry at ghosts seems superior to being angry we currently see displaced to the anger we currently see being displaced to the other. Yeah, I mean that would be better. And it would be kind of fun. I like that. Paladin Hulk, good, bad, you're the guy with the gun. So you choose who lives and dies. I figure it's that. Recluse, recluse, kick off your Sunday shoes. Yeah. Silly Millie, Habibi is the equivalent of baby, but not a translation of baby. Good to know. Reverend Mort, my understanding of Habibi as someone who lives in a country with a large Arabic speaking minority population is that it's a more general term of endearment, a fair amount of width in potential meaning. Silly Millie, it's closer to my love. This is all very fascinating. Thank you. Aradin, all I know is Imshi, not sure on spelling, which is apparently get lost or go away, which our tour guide taught us to rid the vendors of pestering us when we took a vacation to Egypt. This was many years ago. Cool. Silly Millie, yes, at Reverend Mort. Reverend Mort, yes, mental momentum, a real thing. Yeah, I think that mental momentum is important. Okay, so Silly Millie, you're saying that Aradin's word depends on the dialect. And then Aradin, there isn't just one type of friendship. Oh, hi, Ice Bunny. I gotta catch up on chat. You all have been saying a lot of things. And Aradin, not all friendships need to be broad or all encompassing. Silly Millie, you're talking more about the meaning of this word. In some places it is go, like go away, and others it's let's go. Fascinating. Forevermore, relationships really do work better when they have a certain ... spectrum of ways they can be, said the relationship anarchist. Yeah, I don't know if I'm technically a relationship anarchist. I guess I am. I have tried poly for many years and it didn't really work for me. As I think I've mentioned before, I wasn't really able to pay enough attention consistently enough to that many people to the point where I was uncomfortable with not being really a good partner to people, to multiple people at the same time. It's really works best for me to focus on one person at a time. But I do have friendships that are platonic, but I would consider emotionally romantic, but not romantic in the way I'm romantic with Charlie, a very different kind of like, I love this person. I'm kind of really obsessed with them and like feel excited to be a part of their life and witness them and get to be involved with things. But it's not like I don't want to kiss them. The closest thing is sometimes I want to headbutt them lovingly. Does that make sense? I just kind of want to like be so excited about their existence. I want to like smash into them and just be like, oh, so great. Cuteness aggression, I guess. Anyway, Silly Millie, I've been doing well enough recently to even interact with people online. I've even been an internet shut-in. Yeah, you know, I was literally thinking about you this morning and being like, I should reach out again and see how you're doing. Because I was like, I haven't heard from you in a while. And I just want to make sure you know that I haven't forgotten about you. Paladin Hulk, yeah, that's the worst. And then Aradin, I'm secretly Wonder Woman. I'm not sure what you're responding to there, but I will take the compliment. Krellin, yeah, I've noticed haven't been around lately, Millie. Glad you're feeling better. Silly Millie, I'm really not just having a day where I desperately need connection. I'm glad that you can get some of that here. Krellin, well, hope we're feeling that need at least. And okay, so Silly Millie, you're scared because you're starting transcranial magnetic stimulation on Monday. I've had that before, and I enjoyed it, and I think it helped. And I think it's a really interesting sort of procedure. And I hope that your doctors are giving you enough information so that you feel comfortable with engaging in a new medical procedure. And I wish you all the luck in the world. Related to scary medical things, I think a few weeks ago I talked about how we were talking about magical thinking, and I was telling you all that I was waiting for genetic test results, and then I was really terrified because the main thing they were looking for is whether or not I had vascular Ehlers-Danlos, which if you have vascular Ehlers-Danlos, your life expectancy is around 48 because usually your aorta or another major artery dissects, so it just cuts itself in half suddenly and you bleed to death very quickly. And I had a cardiologist years ago suggest that that could be the source of my mysterious heart problems, either that or it's like dysautonomia, which means that my autonomic nervous system is dramatic and doesn't totally do its job right. And I've been waiting for results. I got the results today. I'm very happy to say I do not have vascular Ehlers-Danlos. I just have regular hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos. So it doesn't explain my heart problems, does explain a lot of my chronic pain and easy tendonitis and other things. But hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos is very, very manageable. Does not carry any kind of reduced life expectancy or anything. So I feel very good. I've been out of my mind stressed about it, trying not to think about it, and then got good news today, so that's nice. So I did then get a diagnosis of most likely dysautonomia, which is also fine. It's very manageable, and explains why my body is weird sometimes. And so I can relate to being afraid with medical procedures, and I wish you all the luck in the world. Ice Bunny, the point with Lewis is can you walk on them heels? And then I'm not sure I totally understand with your point, Ice Bunny. You might have been referring to something I forgot I said. Basically the magnetic equivalent of electroshock therapy. I will also say that movies and TV shows have really brutalized the image of electroshock therapy. People still get shock therapy. It's not the kind of thing where it's like you're in terrible pain and your whole body is seizing. It's not like that. I've done transcranial direct stimulation, which is a type of shock therapy that I did to myself. I bought like a home device and did it with my friends for several years. And I found that also very helpful. At least I think so. I have no way of knowing. I was kind of like, things can't get worse. Might as well try. And I hope that it helps you. I really hope that you find the magnetic stimulation very helpful. And it also absolutely makes sense to be afraid and stressed. And yeah, I wish you luck. Let us know how it goes. And then Ice Bunny, it took 5 years of friendship. It took my boyfriend and I to figure out that we care much more than friend zone. That can also happen. And Aradin, you added physical attractiveness. Okay, I'm almost at the bottom. Physical attractiveness might be the first thing you notice, but I find for myself that the more you get to know someone, they either become more or less attractive depending. So even if you don't find someone incredibly attractive right at first, once you get to know them, they could be far more attractive than others that might be more physically attractive. And yes, absolutely. Krillin, familiarity is attractive. This is scientific fact. And then Aradin, you asked kind of the friend crush idea, and Ice Bunny said yes. Are you part ram, perhaps? Oh, for my headbutting? That was in response to you talking about being deceptively strong. Yes, and thank you, Yay, for oh, okay. Thank you, Ice Bunny. Thank you everyone for saying you're glad about my results. I feel super good. I drank a I was like, I'm gonna celebrate. So I was like, oh, I have a beer somebody gave us like 2 years ago in the fridge, unopened. I'm like, that sounds nice. It's It's like in the 90s today. I have a lot of time. I'm gonna have a beer with lunch. I got halfway through it and almost fell asleep. Like it just, I think both the like not being so stressed anymore and my body relaxing, but then also uh just the alcohol. I don't drink usually. I probably have alcohol 3 times a year, maybe, plus or minus two. Um, because it's not my favorite. And so just that little bit like almost knocked me. I was like, it was just a beer. It was like literally just a white beer, so not even that high of alcohol content really. And I was just like, oh, I'm so tipsy and I need to lie down. But luckily that was many hours ago and I'm fine now. And Ice Bunny, you said I referred to Louboutin shoes or 15-centimeter heels. Who can walk on them? I cannot. And sorry, dyslexia. I very butcher everything French. No worries, Ice Bunny. I'm also terrible at spelling, even in my first language. Um, and I'm glad I was able to understand you. Thank you for explaining. And then Silly Millie, starting new therapy also means going from full shut-in, leaving apartment less than once a month, to 5 hours out of the apartment 5 days a week, 6 weeks in a row. That's going to be a tough transition. Sudden, drastic life change on top of compounded fears of losing the core of who I am. Yeah, for sure. For sure. This all makes a lot of sense. And I hope that you have support for getting to the place to get the treatment, especially like if they can pick you up. I know if you're in Washington State and you're on any kind of Medicaid, they do have a service where they will pick you up and bring you to your appointments. So you don't have to get there yourself. And I recommend that because that helped me when I was both with ADHD, but also just like difficulties leaving the house. Okay, one more meme. This is from @_page_Turner. Tolkien would get ripped to shreds by a modern writing workshop. Dune was finally released by an automotive manual publisher after being rejected 20 times by mainstream presses. Criticism is abundant, rejection hurts, but it's not a sign that your work has no value. I just wanted to give you all something positive to think about. Just because you don't do things the way other people would do them doesn't mean they're wrong. And then here's an article. I don't actually want to read this one, but it's just another model about what the future might look like. 100 million Americans will be living in an extreme heat belt region by 2053. People often hear the word 2050 or the 2050s and think, oh, that's so far away, because we're still thinking it's like 50 years away. But a lot of us are going to be alive in 2050 and not that old, but also not that young. And or we'll be in our old age. And I think it's really important to think about, how do we want to vote? How do we want to prepare the world so that our middle and late ages are not a total shit show nightmare? Yeah, Paladin, or okay, Silly Millie, you said support, question mark. I will be taking the one line, and then you stick your tongue out. And then Paladin Hulk, you said Tolkien would indeed get ripped to shreds, and errata in popularity does not mean quality. Krellin, you said alive in 2050, question mark. God, I hope not. And 2050 is barely tomorrow. Ice Bunny, I'll be in my 90s. How old will I be in 2050? I will be in my early 60s. Yeah. So, yeah, I'll be in my early 60s. Um, and I think about how, like, if I have a kid now, this is one of the things that makes me want to have a child sooner rather than later. Is I'm like, oh man, if I have a kid now, I'll be this age by the time they're 20 or 15. And I'm like, ah. But mostly just I want to live long enough to see my kids grow up and hopefully get to meet grandkids and stuff and have time with grandkids. Um, And yeah. Anyway, yeah, a lot of you are talking about being in your 90s or your 70s. And yeah, I'll be in my 60s, so we're all not that far apart in age. And I think it's important to just think about, is that going to be a world that's welcoming for us? I can't read the whole article because they want me to log in, and I'm not doing that. I read screenshots of it on Twitter. Someone screenshotted the whole thing, but I lost that tweet. And Silly Mill, you said 2050 is only half a lifetime from now for some of us. Um, and then Reverend Mort, yeah, in the far future of 1999. Oh, this is in reply to Rod saying, I wonder if people see 2050 and think that it is the far future as it is something that was used in sci-fi in the past and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think people also just, the word 50, especially people who were aware of the world in the 1900s, like the 1980s, 1990s, 50 feels very far away. It's not that far, y'all. It's not that far. Um, yep. Yeah. Paladin Hulk, I love this joke. If you have kids now, they can play Fallout before they have to live it. I hope. um, reminder 1984. Krellin says, reminder 1984 was the far future to Orwell. Um, 50 is the new 30. You say Ice Bunny. I kind of agree with that. Okay, so we got some more images. I'm going to go through them kind of quickly. This one is a image where it says, you see a giant bag of money. You see, this does have, unfortunately, as most political comics around class do, has fat phobia in it, where the sort of over-consuming rich person is often portrayed as fat. But this comic, I think, is quite old, and it shows a rich person wearing like a top hat, smoking a cigar, wearing a tuxedo, though this isn't really a tuxedo, um, because there's no tails. With a big bag of money, handing a small bag of money to someone who's supposed to be working class, wearing overalls, and maybe a butcher or something like that, kind of hunched over, looking older. And it says, wealth and poverty do not exist in an unfortunate but innocent juxtaposition. They endure in a close dynamic interrelationship. Wealth creates poverty and relies on it for its own continued existence. Without the working poor, how could the leisurely rich make do? I also think that there's a great quote from Voltaire, the French philosopher, where he said the rich need an abundant supply of poor, because in order for the rich to be rich and to be able to afford their lifestyles, they need a lot of people who are desperate enough to prop them up, to support them, to do work for them, etc. And you're right, Silly Millie. There are people being born now who could be alive in 2100. Yeah, that's really wild, but not that unlikely. If I have a kid now, they could be alive in 2100. And if I have grandkids, they certainly will be likely to be alive in 2100. Yeah, Paladin Hulk can't be an exploiter without the exploited. Um, I love Voltaire, the musician, Krellin. Yeah, I've read Voltaire. Okay, but I like the music a lot more. But I like some of Voltaire's quotes, and like I can see why a lot of people were into Voltaire. I read Candide, and I was like, yeah, this guy probably was pretty romantic. Okay, so this is a meme. I'm sorry, it's not very big. I'm gonna zoom in so you can all see it better, and we'll go across. And it says the up and coming American suburban town starter pack. It says new home starting in the low 650,000s, no trees. Quote, it sure is a hot one today. Or you have the choice of a one-bedroom studio that looks like this, $950 a month, $500 security deposit, $20 parking pass. Also, that is brick getting full sunlight right on it. That's going to be hot. Then you have like a strip mall with a ton of parking, lease too high and never rents on one building. cell phone store, not your carrier, insurance broker, checks cashed, hair salon, one of these companies, and a Chinese restaurant, one of these companies. Or you have these sort of corner island restaurants where it says insert Darden restaurant, Olive Garden, Longhorn Steakhouse, Red Lobster, etc. And then 15 car dealers on the same road, usually a Strode, drugstore at a four-way intersection, etc. And this is just depressing, right? Like, look at this. This is not a place to sort of really build a life, right? Like, if you live here and you want to visit your friend who lives here, you can't just walk there. You have to go all the way around or all the way around this way and get over there. These are not meant to be easily navigatable. These are really meant to be car dependent. There's no trees. This feels dead to me. And then where are you going to go? What are you going to do? There's nothing. Nothing. No. And then you've got another meme, and it's like this person looking angry at this very sort of human scale community. This walkable street stuff will ruin our city and turn my neighborhood into a slum. Where will I park my SUV? And then the same person looking gleeful at a Strode. Yes, thank God they added 3 more lanes. Like, look at this. This is a pedestrian probably trying to cross the road or get someplace. And this is a nightmare. It was a nightmare. That's all. And then the last one here is thank you, Reverend Mort, for adding that extra information. Today I learned Darden is a company that owns like a bunch of restaurants and like Cara Foods here. Yeah. So a lot of these companies that seem different are all the same conglomerate. And here it just says stop making road-based infrastructure. Cities were never supposed to be car dependent. Years of planning, yet no real-world application found for anything better than public transit and walking. Wanted to do navigation. We had a tool for that. It was called using landmarks. Quote, yes, the Walmart is 5 miles away. Please let me go 10 miles for lunch. Statements dreamed up by the utterly deranged. Look at what town planners have been demanding you respect for all this time with all the rulers and protractors we built for them. These are real cities built by real town planners. Like, this just looks like, hello, I would like to be stuck in traffic for an hour, please. You know, we've built a world that's not great. That's all I'm trying to say. And teleportation, yeah, would be better. But I just want things that are human scale. Like, I would like there to be streetcars, buses, trains that could take me to other places. I would love it if, though, which is where I live now, I can get to like 8 different grocery stores, 50 million pharmacies. There's always one pharmacy that's open 24 hours. It rotates throughout each district. So there's always one available. And there's, you know, I have several doctor's offices that are literally a 5-minute walk from where I live. The furthest one I ever go to is 15 minutes walk away. There's movie theaters, there's bookstores, there's clothing shops. Everything I need is really within a 15-minute walk of where I live. There's parks. There's literally an amusement park a 20-minute walk from where I live in the Prater. Like, a huge amusement park too. I'm not talking something dinky, like tons of giant roller coasters and fun houses and things for kids. There's like, you know, I can get on a train or a bus and get to like a national park really easily. I can, you know, there are things where yes, having a car would be convenient, but if I really needed that, I can just rent one for the day. I can do one of these car share things like Car to Go or whatever they're called, and that's enough. That's enough, right? I might need or be benefited by a car once or twice a year, maybe, and not having to have a car has been one of the best things that's happened to me. There's a video I want to share with you all. Let me actually just bring it up. I forgot to prepare it ahead of time. And as you can see, I've been doing a lot of Elden Ring stuff. How cars wreck your finances. I have caps lock stuff on, apparently. This one, City Nerd, driest person I've ever met, manages to make pure data very, very, very interesting. But this is real data, actual data, breaks down exactly how driving negatively impacts your finances, becomes a huge net loss for you, and really goes into, all of this. I recommend City Nerd a lot. I would totally interview City Nerd if I thought that they would be interviewed by me, but I also don't know exactly what I'd ask them. But check them out. They have a lot of really good videos, a lot of data, heavy data stuff. One of the other videos that I really, really like is about who dies in accidents and how it's not an accident, and how we shouldn't actually even be calling car accidents anymore, because the data makes it very clear that they're not accidents, that they are, this one here, car crashes in the US, who's responsible, and who bears the cost, and how we talk about it. I'll also put this in the chat. These two videos are very, very, very good and talk about one of my favorite parts. Let me just find here this data where it's like where Americans die, what they search on Google, and what the media reports on. So the actual causes of death, Google searches, media coverage, two different, New York Times and The Guardian. And as you can see, terrorism is barely registered here. It's at less than 0.01%, but it's over a third in major news sources, but almost nothing on heart disease, even though heart disease is huge. And then you also have things like, diabetes. People do Google it more than the number of people who are likely to have it, which is good, because preventing diabetes prevents a lot of other things, like a lot of people have strokes as a secondary issue in relation to diabetes, or kidney disease can also be a secondary condition as a result of primary diabetes. And so there is good concern there. People being more concerned about, oh, is this a symptom of diabetes than what actually Americans die from, is good. And yet, a lot of these other deaths could be actually the primary cause of death was the diabetes that caused the, say, kidney failure or the stroke. Exactly, diabetes does run through generations. It is heavily genetic, and there are other things that can be done to reduce the risk of developing diabetes. And in many cases, type 2 diabetes can be reversed. And so, yeah, exactly, Paladin Hulk. So do cars, right? We see almost nothing on, like, road incidents is more like, is the third biggest thing, falls and accidents. But we have almost nothing media coverage on it, right? It's only the most egregious. There was a car crash not that long ago, like a week ago in LA, that killed like 8 people, including a pregnant woman and her like 1-year-old child, and multiple other children, because it was like huge flow of traffic and someone just sped like 90 all the way through the intersection. As they hit cars, a bunch of them burst into flames. And the thing is, like, I really want to impress upon people, imagine we could anthropomorphize a lot of the things that we do. And imagine that anything you spend your time on is you literally cutting sheets of your life out, like time, because all we have is time, really. We have ourselves and we have time, and that's it. Those are the only things we truly own. And you take out X amount of time and you give it to the altar of, say, like cooking food, or the altar of, media or entertainment, relaxation. This is not a criticism of media. I think relaxation is incredibly important. And then I want to think about all the other sacrifices that we make to all of these different things, right? And the altar of fast individual transport is a ravenous, bloodthirsty God that demands heaps of human sacrifices every year, including babies, including, so many people. And we happily and unquestioningly throw more bodies on top of this altar of sacrifice. And we don't really do that for very many other things. And there's other altars that are, you know, other aspects of this god of fast transport, like oil and gas and, extractive technologies and, all these other things. And those also take heaps of human sacrifices. And we don't have to do that. We just don't. We can do so many other things. But this guide really goes into a lot of good data. I'll zoom ahead so you can see, looking at really just government data and exactly how it all makes sense and breaking it down. I want to recommend this video a lot. Yeah, I mean, Krillin's right. So let's back up a little bit. Krillin, it is still so weird to me that we consider type 1 and type 2 diabetes somehow the same disease when the only real similarity is the one single symptom that was easy to detect by Romans. I definitely agree with you. I'm pretty sure I have said that exact thing to people. Again, Krillin, sometimes I feel like you might just be me from the future. Like, have I time traveled back into the past to interact with myself through the internet? Because sometimes you say things and I'm like, I've literally said that same thing. Silly Millie, we need a global vaccine for cars. And can we chat vehicular deaths versus pandemic deaths? And is that a compelling graph? And Krellin said pandemic is almost 10x as many deaths, or as many people, Millie. Yeah, so this pandemic was really quite bad. And especially if you look at under the fact that a lot of deaths are likely undercounted, if you look at excess deaths, and excess deaths are like outside of normal causes, how many people do you statistically die in any given time, and especially with things like road accidents and falls and things like that. And we would have expected the number to go down, but they went up and pretty much across the board. And we can attribute a lot of that through the magic of statistics to probably undercounting pandemic related deaths. Anyway, and yeah, sure, if we took Silly Millie, you say, okay, but pandemic lasts for 2 to 4 years versus cars lasting over 10 decades. So pandemics, I'm not sure what exactly you're trying to say with lasting 2 to 4 years, because basically, historically speaking, aside from smallpox, every pandemic causing pathogen is still around and still kills people, with some exceptions of things that like with H1N1, the also called the 1918 flu or the Spanish flu. That is predicted that pandemic sort of ended because it killed everybody that it could. Everyone who was susceptible to die from this pathogen died. And most of the time, though, the sort of like real shit phase of pandemics can go for as long as like 10 years. And then when they move into their more endemic phase, the overall endemicity is a kind of meaningless statement. There's a really good article about endemicity. I'm spelling this wrong. It's meaningless. Let me get you the. Let me find the actual article. Let me see. Is Reddit actually going to link to this article? No. Coronavirus. No, it's not what I'm looking for. Okay, I'm gonna look on Google. I use Quant because Quant is better data security than Google. Because Google saves all your search data. Here we go. this here really talks about how like endemicity isn't like an actually defined thing, yada yada. And I take your point, silly Millie, that overall, like COVID is not likely to last forever in this sort of killing tons of people versus cars overall. Um, but I don't think there's that data. Or if there is, I haven't found it. Okay, backing up. Um, and I definitely, like I said, silly Millie, I take your point there. Um, yeah, Krillin, I think Millie is talking specifically about COVID. And then Aradin, we are stuck with COVID forever. Now I'm afraid. Hopefully, it will become much more like the flu. Krillin, but disease kills, has killed, and will likely kill more people than all other causes put together. Even if we extinct ourselves in a nuclear cloud. Yeah, yeah. Aradin, I'm back with a float. Ooh, nice. Silly Millie, I'm trying to think of a way to make the car deaths portrayed in a more impactful way that people will take more seriously. I appreciate that. And unfortunately, I think that most people don't take pandemic deaths very seriously. Related to this, after I finish catching up on chat, I'm only using the pandemic for punch. And Arad and car deaths are definitely far more preventable deaths. Yeah. Ice Bunny, one of my classmates in language school was a trained virologist who at one point worked with the WHO and said to us for every desire we get rid of, or disease we get rid of, a new one will come to fill that space. I guess that's talking about evolutionary, like niches, and how if we remove something and there's no pressure, like as one strain of Omicron outcompetes another one, the other ones basically die off. And if I imagine that's what the person is talking about. Um, yeah, it's a good marketing angle. And then and nature's out to get us, Ice Bunny. Yeah. Krellin, COVID has killed more Americans than any single other cause. Heart disease and cancer are both large groupings, not individual causes for 3 years warning, and no one cares. Yeah. And this brings me to another idea I wanted to share today. We're just going, I don't know when we're going to play Stardew Valley today. I didn't think that I was going to talk this much because I'm like, oh, I've been having a rough time recently. I've had a lot of health issues. Um, and everything's kind of topsy turvy in my life. Obviously, today it's settling down. And I was like, I'm probably just going to chat for like, I don't know, 30 minutes, and then we'll play some Stardew Valley. And hour and a half in, we're not even, I haven't even read a single article yet. But I'm having a lovely time. I love talking to you all. Krellin, I knew you were going to talk this much because I know what happens when Trooper misses a bunch of streams. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Uh, Aradin, because quote, COVID is a hoax created by the Democrats, unquote, don't you know? Sarcasm, heavy, heavy sarcasm. Yeah, I was expecting this as well. Well, so you all know me better than I know myself. But yeah, I love talking to you all, and um, I'm glad that this brand, even though it's not a brand, this is, I know everyone talks about like, oh, you have your like persona, and that's not totally who you are in real life. And I to some degree, I think that that's true because there's other aspects of myself that never come up on stream. But at the same time, this is really who I am. Like, this is the kind of stuff I talk about, like in bed with my husband. I'll just be like, hey, so let me tell you about this new like disease pathology I learned about for like the development of schizophrenia today. It's pretty fantastic. And yeah, anyway. Um, hold on. Did the fun, I don't know how to pronounce this, get you? One of the reasons I would not, I don't know what this word is. Um, I'm sorry your head is killing you, silly Millie. And yeah, missing doses of meds, basically never great. I don't know what this word means. Is it this? I'm gonna look at this on Wikipedia. Is there an English? Wind? Is this what you're talking about, Ice Bunny? This wind? Oh, mountain winds from the Alps that can trigger migraines. Ah, because of pressure changes. Yeah, that might have happened. I've been doing pretty well managing my migraines because I've changed a lot of lifestyle factors. Getting a chair that's actually ergonomically correct. Shout out to whatever company this is, DX Racer, for making chairs that are good for short people. Because every company I looked at that was like, we have chairs for short people. No, they had chairs for short end of average people, not actually short people. And the fact that I can actually put my feet on the ground and not just have my toes on the ground or not anything while sitting all the way back is a game changer. Huge game changer. And it's helped with a lot. Um, anyway, Silly Millie, I'm sorry you were dealing with anxiety over the weekend. Yeah, and also taking too long to refill your pills. I hard relate to that because I get distracted or stressed about calling. Anyway, I want to read this tweet to y'all. This is from Bidet Marksman, um, but Marx smelled like Karl Marx. I did not notice the name before, but I think that this is a really important idea. That's true, Krellin. The definition of dwarfism is being under 5 feet tall, so you may need to look for things specifically for people with dwarfism, not just short. Yes, I did technically qualify to that for that until university. My first freshman year of college, I had a mild growth spurt and grew like half an inch. So I'm just over 5 feet tall, or just at 5 feet tall. It's like CNC is a bit bigger. But part of why I got an Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis is because I've developed scoliosis. Most of the time, you develop scoliosis either in childhood, or if you develop it in adulthood, it's related to disc degeneration. But I don't have any degeneration in my discs. I've just started to have a spine that curves a little bit. Just a little bit. It's like 10 degrees, which is the threshold for being considered to have scoliosis. Under 10 degrees is considered typical. But you can see it if you were to look at my spine, you can see this one little section, this little bit, just like, and so I lost height. I'll probably keep losing height. Anyway, there is a curious phenomena that results from the relatively brief window of time a single human lifetime provides. We perceive the current state of the natural world as normal. This is known as the shifting baseline syndrome. And we have here this picture where it says 1800 at the bottom, and we see the ocean, and it's full. Big and small life. Lots of different plants and plant-like animals and things that crawl along the ground. 1950, there's still a good amount, but it's a lot less. In 2019, it's pretty empty, and there's a ton of plastic floating around in it. And I think this is one of those things that we have to be really careful about in general. When I was a kid, I read this book called Silent Spring that was written before I was born. And it's somebody who was a biologist or an ecologist. I forget. Let me actually just look it up. Silent Spring book. And here, yeah, it was published in 1962. And it was about concern with the number of birds going down, and specifically related to things like pesticides and other things that we're putting into the environment and the effect that was having on the ecosystems. And I read this book, and I read other related things, and some of the descriptions of just like how cacophonous spring could be with bird sound made me realize, wow, a lot of birds have died. Because I hear like 3 or 4 birds, and I'm like, whoa, it's spring, it's so wonderful. I'm not hearing like 50, 60 birds in the morning. And the thing is I even have seen over my own lifetime, even in places where I stayed for a relatively long time, the number of birds I would hear in spring has gone down. And the shifting baseline syndrome, right? This is also one of the reasons why intergenerational relationships are really important. We tend to knock the old person being like, when I was your age, I had to walk uphill both ways to school. We knock that, but it's actually really important for us to hear the context of people who were alive before we were. And, you know, historical memory is something incredibly precious for many, many, many reasons. And the shifting baseline syndrome has a huge impact on how we perceive everything and also consent. Like this also happens even in our own lifetime where we get used to something and start to normalize it and then forget that things used to be different. Um, and here, I'm just going to skip ahead. Silly Millie, ugh, I do not prefer the current state of the natural world as normal by any perforce. Consider, okay, thank you. I do not consider the current state of the natural world as normal by any measure whatsoever. And Ice Bunny, my ice Greenlandic friends consider Denmark loud because we have trees. I better not say I walked both to and from school. My school was 2 streets away from home. Yeah, I mean, these things happen. So some of this, this thread goes into a lot more examples. So I want to read through this a bit. One way to understand the shifting baseline is to understand how the biomes we consider natural today have been heavily modified from what existed in the past. Few environments demonstrate this better than forests. While forest cover has changed dramatically in the past several hundred years, I'm actually going to bigify this. The change in the forest makeup has arguably been more stark. Since European settlers arrived in the US, 90% of the virgin forest that once covered much of the lower 48 states no longer exists. So this is 1620, and this is today. And to me, this is a rough image. But it's difficult to understand what virgin forests even looked like when so few reference points remain. Many old growth forests have been replaced with quote forests that are much more accurately conceptualized as tree farms. So I think that you can see this here, this image of an old growth tree. We see a lot more diversity. First of all, there's more floor cover. There's probably more breakpoints where the light can come in. We see older trees, but we also see more young trees next to them. And then we see basically nursery logs. I mean, nursery trees are a specific type of tree, but I mean, when a tree falls, that creates this tremendous opportunity. But here in the second growth forest, almost all of the trees are essentially the same age. We get a little bit of diversity, but not very much. There is some moss cover on the ground and there are some dead trees, but most of the time, what is left is stumps of trees that have been removed. And that does not create the same opportunities for biodiversity. And then here it goes into proportion, and we have old growth, coppice, modified, and planted, and then the year and how it kind of goes from 1400 to 2000 with the vast majority of trees being planted, and number of generations back from the present, and things are getting smaller and smaller. And this middle age band is almost disappearing because we tend to cut those down, and we have a lot of old growth trees that are protected, and a lot of the middle age trees get turned into tree farm trees. Yeah, so Aradini said those who fail to learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. Just always true. Carolyn, it's hard to overestimate how much the planet is the trees. This planet is the trees planet, yes. Even with all the deforestation, over 50% of biomass is still trees and other woody plants. Absolutely. Silly Millie, I have a story that supports the changing baseline, but I can't share it because the story breaks my heart so much. Well, yeah. Ice Bunny, does it make a sound when no one is around to hear it? Yeah, I think, yeah. Depends on how you define the word sound, though. And the word make. And maybe it. Silly Millie, not around nature. All right, so then here, Even many forests officially classified as old growth have been logged as recently as the beginning of the 20th century, despite some forest characteristics taking around thousands of years to fully develop. So we have this first picture, aerial photo showing fresh clear cuts and younger second growth forests with significantly reduced carbon storage per hectare compared to old growth forests, taken during a flight across southern Vancouver Island. And you can just see more of this. So you see here these big sections that get clear cut out. And the thing that's difficult is like a very healthy forest is often a managed forest. A lot of trees, a lot of forests, a lot of ecosystems, as they evolved with humans as part of them. We tend to think of humans always as an invasive species, or a lot of people do, but we actually need to see the ways in which we always impact the ecosystem we're part of, like any living thing. And we need to be more thoughtful about like how did we and how should we fit into that. So managing a forest to help keep it healthy, which includes cutting and removing some certain number of trees, whether to do controlled burns to reduce the risk of lightning strikes causing major forest fires, to help make sure, like, fire is a part of a healthy ecosystem a lot of the time as well. And then also making sure that we're thoughtful about how we do it is really important. And this is not that. Given our bias towards land biomes, our concept of healthy oceans is even more distorted. Beginning in the 1800s, the largest mammals or animals to ever live were subjected to an industrialized slaughter. The reason? To fuel our insatiable hunger for lamp oil derived from their blubber. And so we see here a lot of whale hunting, porpoise hunting, and then we see here, after successful whale hunts, a lot of dead whales on beaches. As a result, the whale populations were reduced by 99% in a single century. If we hadn't switched to petroleum-based oils in the beginning of the 20th century, it is almost certain that whales would have been hunted to extinction. And as you can see, they've barely recovered, and we're not doing them very many favors with how noisy and crowded we've made the ocean with shipping. The full impact of this dramatic decline in whale population is still not fully understood, but it is believed that the loss of the fertilizing effect of whale poop on ocean algae levels permanently crashed the productivity of ocean food webs and even altered global climate. So this is just, an image of a whale pooping. And, everything, nature doesn't waste stuff. And anytime there are resources that are going unused, that creates an opportunity for something to evolve that can use them. And whale poop, but also whales dying. They tend to sink to the ocean floor when they die, and that's a really important source of large amounts of meat and fat for things like hagfish and a lot of other sort of bottom feeders that then cycle through the rest of the ecosystem of the oceans and then affect the rest of the world. Like, it's a very important thing. And you say, Ice Bunny, be right back. Okay. Silly Millie, let's just say that we are frogs in boiling water, and it's far past time to be getting out of the bloody pot. Krellin, everything the U.S. Forest Service knows about controlling fires comes from native knowledge. Yes, and even still, they're not very good at trusting the native knowledge. They still do things kind of halfway. And that seems more like the whale has diarrhea. Fun fact, ambergris is a main ingredient in a lot of perfumes, and it's possibly whale vomit and or whale poop. And then here we have a quote from an article saying that whale poop fuels plankton, providing food for marine life. By scooping up food and pumping out excrement, whales help keep key nutrients suspended close to the surface, where they can power blooms of carbon-absorbing phytoplankton that form the base of ocean food webs. And then continuing, here other ocean species weren't so lucky. European settlers' descriptions of Atlantic cod stalks off the Grand Banks of North America recount fishing grounds so plentiful and dense with fish that they could be walked on. And we have this picture here of just like a net full of fish. And then we have here a quote, the once abundant cod stocks that had brought European settlers over to Canada a few centuries earlier and said to be so plentiful that you could walk across the water on their backs had sustained local economies and people for 500 years. And as it says here, but after the advent of modern commercial fishing in the 1960s, the rate of extraction from the Grand Banks became too great for the cod to bear, leading to the dramatic collapse of stocks once considered to be virtually inexhaustible. So we see here more modern commercial fishing, and then we see the collapse of the population. Really, really dramatic collapse, and it's all over. But these creeping losses aren't just in iconic species. Over the past few years, many people began noticing a dramatic decline in bug splatter on their cars' windscreens after long road trips as compared to years past, doubled the windshield phenomena. Subsequent study has revealed that far from being an artifact of changing car aerodynamics or selective memory, this windshield phenomena is a real artifact of a shocking global decline in insect populations. So we have, this looks like a Guardian article from Damien Carrington. Car splatometer tests reveal huge decline in number of insects. Research shows abundance at sites in Europe has plunged by up to 80% in 2 decades. And then a quote, the total mass of insects is falling by a precipitous 2.5% a year, according to the best data available, suggesting they could vanish within a century. Widespread pesticide use combined with replacing fields of wildflowers with soy or corn are the primary culprits, and while some might celebrate a decline in what are often deemed pests, insects form both the irreplaceable base of the food web and pollinate countless plants. I want to really stress, even wasps and mosquitoes are essential pollinators. Wasps get a really bad rap, and mosquitoes are kind of universally hated. And yet there are species of plants that are only populated by wasps and mosquitoes, and they are essential. And continuing, part of the shifting baseline results from our tendency to be less likely to notice something is missing than notice the appearance of something new. For example, in the 1960s, people began reporting the peculiar absence of bird songs during the springtime. And we have here, and no birds sing over increasingly large areas of the United States. Spring now comes unheralded by the return of birds, and the early mornings are strangely silent, where once they were filled with the beauty of birdsong. To investigate, environmental scientist Rachel Carson, that's the person who wrote Silent Spring, began looking at the practice of indiscriminately spraying pesticides like DDT over vast areas to suppress mosquito populations and found it was leading to a dramatic collapse in wild bird populations. But part of the shifting baseline is also cultural, as slow change does not go unnoticed in all cultures. Aboriginal storytelling, for example, has multi-generational error checking that has accurately passed down oral histories of islands that sank into the sea 10,000 years ago. Yeah, so I just want to stress that Aboriginal, any sort of oral tradition culture, including a lot of Native American cultures, the oral storytelling tends to be incredibly accurate, including the formation of things like Crater Lake and the eruption that happened more than 10,000 years ago. It was accurately recorded. People didn't believe them. Then they found the evidence and were like, oh yeah, it was accurate. Same thing is also true with like what happened to the boats, the Terror and the Erebus, that were trying to find a way through the Northwest Ice Passage to create shipping lanes. Those boats sort of disappeared and were lost, and the Netsilik people who live in that region were like, we know where the boats are. People didn't believe them. The boats were exactly where they said they were. Silly. And Krellin, you said, honey is bee barf. Honey is bee barf. Imagine a deranged me screaming this in the street like in Soylent Green. And then Paladin Hulk, you said plankton diet. Oorah, that's the marine life. Krellin, there were so many we never thought we'd run out, is why there are no more passenger pigeons. Yeah, exactly. Silly Millie, where are all the B's? We stopped paying teachers. They are D's and F's now. Oh, that's a good joke. I like that. Okay. Science lets us zoom out even further. In the 3.5 billion year story of life on Earth, there have been 5 mass extinction events, Human activity is now causing a sixth, and while life has shown to be incredibly resilient after each global biodiversity took millions of years to recover, human-caused extinctions aren't a new phenomenon in our history, but the rate of extinctions during the past 50 years has accelerated to the point of becoming a threat of the same magnitude as climate change and nuclear war for our long-term survival. So this is one of the reasons why I also try to talk a lot about not just climate change as in global warming. And this is also part of why the idea of like technology will save us is very unlikely, because we're talking about so many huge problems at the same time. It's really easy to become overwhelmed, absolutely. There are definitely going to be things where we've reached the point of no return as already, and yet it is never too late to change what we're doing. We're going to wait until it's too late to avoid the worst effects, most likely. But one of the things I want to talk about today is some types of direct action that we can do that will actually help with preparing us for a less stable future. And there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we can do. Local elections, as I've stressed a million times, advocate for things. Moreover, you do not need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to start an advocacy, activist group, whatever, from the ground up. I promise you, in your local area, there are lots of people who are very knowledgeable, doing really good work, who could absolutely use your help. And pick one or two issues that you care about and really dedicate yourself to it. That's the other thing. It's easy to get overwhelmed because we're talking about so many problems at the same time. And then people feel like, well, where do I even start? Which one's the most important? Where am I going to do the most good? No, don't do it. Pick one or two and focus on that. This is what I've told my mom. My mom used to really like get herself worked up looking at the news and thinking about all the social issues and being angry about so many things. And I was like, yeah, that's all well and good. But like, this doesn't help anybody, and it actively makes your life worse. I was like, pick one or two things like voting rights and like, domestic violence or something. And then really dedicate time and energy to that. I care about so many issues. I picked consent because to me, consent is really good, and it translates to being able to talk about a lot of these issues that I care about from this lens that also then has spillover effects into making people have less trauma and less difficulty and better communication and deeper relationships, which I then think also feed back into how we're going to solve a lot of these problems. So for me, I was like, this is great. It's not, similarly, I don't want to be specifically a climate activist, at least not currently, because I get too emotional about it. I can talk very, very comfortably about like horrible traumas and like consent violations and all of this stuff, and I feel very comfortable with it. When I talk about a lot of environmental stuff in that sort of way, sometimes I can get a bit overwhelmed because I like trees and plants and stuff a lot. And Aradin, we talk about climate change from a wholly human-focused aspect far too often. I agree. Krellin, the Earth and life on Earth will survive us, quote, assuming we don't irradiate the entire planet. Or parentheses, global warming is just the planet getting a fever trying to oust this pesky virus known as humanity. We need to care about global warming as self-preservation, not as killing the Earth. I mean, yes, and I think that a lot of people are not contributing in the virus sort of way, and it's mostly elite overconsumption and how we've organized our lives in the wealthiest nations in the world. And when I say elite overconsumption, a lot of the time I include myself. Ice Bunny, you said 5:52 is something like dinner soon, or for us something like dinner soon. Yes, probably, but Charlie's not home yet. I haven't even played a game today, but this is great. I'm having a good time. I want to I'm gonna show you. I have more tabs, but I need to show you. You can kind of see it. Look, I have all these other tabs of things I wanted to talk about. We're not going to get to all of them today. That's okay. That's okay. Uh, anyway, so human-caused extinctions aren't a new phenomena in our history, but the rate of extinction during the past 50 years has accelerated to the point of becoming a threat of the same magnitude as climate change and nuclear war. So one of the things is this person does a good job of having sources, but I wish they included more links to the original source. My one pet peeve with this thread. And then it says megafauna losses at the quarterly. And I am just making up for Sunday. You're right, Aradin. This is Our World in Data. This actually does have good sources here. And it's talking about, survivors versus extinctions and just megafauna, and then human migration and the extinction of large animals. And this is historically, and some animals that went extinct as humans sort of moved through things. We have hunted a lot of things to extinction. Europe used to have lions 14,000 years ago. Bye, silly Millie. And good luck. Let us know how everything goes. And then next, mass extinctions are defined as a loss of more than 70% of existing species over the course of 2 million years. Consider then that the current rate of extinction is 20 to 100 times faster than the last mass extinction, which ended the age of the dinosaurs and was caused by an asteroid impact. So, yeah, we have to just think about this post 1500s and post 1980s extinction rates. And we can sort of think about reptiles, bony fish, amphibians, mammals, birds, and vertebrates. And aside from mammals, everything is worse. A lot of this is because we've changed our hunting and we changed our population patterns and are not hunting as many animals for fur. We have better farming practices, etc. Our species going extinct faster than we'd expected? Yes. It's hard to look at all of this, in my opinion, for me at least, and not feel a lot of heartache and a lot of sadness. But also, I'm hopeful because the more people know about these things, the more we care about these things, the more we can do something. And while this current extinction event is a flash on the geological timescale, it has thus far stretched over multiple lifetimes. As such, over the course of a single lifetime, let alone a few years, it can be very difficult to perceive the massive changes to life on this planet. But once you become aware of the shifting baseline, it's hard to see wild spaces the same again. There's an eerie feeling you can't shake when visiting forests or spending time in the ocean. It's a feeling of stillness and almost tangible emptiness that permeates. There's an understandable reaction amongst those who correctly sense the troubling rise in ecofascism, an ideology that pushes a genocidal view that large portions of humanity are a scourge in need of being culled so that the earth can be preserved as a virgin garden for the few. This is something we also need to be very, very, very careful of. Very, very, very careful. The solution is not to kill a ton of people. The solution is to change our behaviors. How much are we consuming? I mean, think about it. If we even returned to like 1940s, 1950s levels of energy consumption, that would go really far. And I want you to think about your parents and your grandparents alive during that time period. They didn't have terrible shit lives, right? I mean, surviving world wars and stuff like that, setting that aside, but overall, they were able to do things. And this doesn't mean we have to give up advances in medicine or telecommunications or, video games. What I'm saying is that we can consume less and we can have new things develop, new products, new whatever, at a slower pace. And all of that is good. And we can return to that and not have terrible lives, and we could make the world a lot more equitable. We could solve, because like environmental issues are consent issues, they're racism issues, they're colonialism issues, they're sexism issues, like all of these things simultaneously, animal rights, all of it, healthcare. It's all connected. These things are all connected. And this is also one of the reasons why it's okay to pick one thing, because since all of these things are connected, working on any one of them, lending your time to any one of them, affects all of them. Downstream, yeah. Um, and Ice Bunny, did I not say nature's out to get us? So we end like the dinos. Yeah. Krellin, we could also stop living in hot places and using air conditioning. Or if we live in hot places, we could return to one of the other problems with the way we've done colonialism and like mass culture is we try to live the same lifestyle everywhere now, which also doesn't make any sense. If you live in a place that's incredibly hot, especially in summer at midday, the response to that should be you stay inside in cool places and you don't do anything during those hours. You lounge around, you drink cold tea, you take a nap, whatever. You design your buildings to be more focused on, spreading out heat. And like, yes, maybe you get more lizards and spiders and stuff in your house than you would if you try to seal it up, but that's fine. And you focus on different types of clothing. You focus on things that make life in that area make more sense. You don't try to have, the same foods everywhere available all year, all the time. You don't try to, like regional foods, regional lifestyles. That makes sense. We can still live in some of these places. We just have to be willing to not all have the same. I mean, it's like global business and stuff. This is not me trying to be a conspiracy theorist. This is me just saying, like, because of the constraints of capitalism, we're all trying to lead the exact same lifestyle everywhere in the whole world, no matter what is happening. And then simultaneously, like if you live in like Lapland, it doesn't make sense that you try to be just as active in the middle of winter as you do in the middle of summer when there's no sunlight. Like that should be a time for resting, and like we can have seasonality to our behaviors as well, not just our like consumption patterns. What are y'all saying in chat? And Ice Bunny, they put a lot of spray in the air that caused a hole in the ozone layer. And as Krellin is saying, and we banned those chemicals globally and fixed the hole in the ozone layer. We can do the right thing. It is possible. We keep talking about these changes like they're difficult or impossible, and no, they fucking aren't. And I totally agree with you, Krellin. And Ice Bunny, we could harvest the heat or sun to make energy, and we can use and maybe develop an effective way to store that energy. Well, have I got a great article for you in just a second about why we don't need any of that. And how we already have the resources we need to make all of these changes. We already have the technological miracles. But this reaction often veers too far in the other direction, seeing Earth in mechanistic terms, little more than a depot from which to extract resources. It's a crude view that conceptualizes humans as somehow separate or above the intricate web of life upon which we depend. This view bears the marks of 20th century socialist-led projects, tunnel focus on growing industrial production at all costs, and unfortunate necessity to outgrow capitalist empire and defend against invasion and encirclement. The 21st century must prioritize differently. One of the more fundamentalist traits of our limited human perception is that we tend to view what exists now as what has always been. We see our present world as invariable. This is what happens a lot with capitalism, too. One of the best things capitalism has done is make it hard for us to imagine any other system, because also all of our culture has become entwined with capitalism to the point that essentially our culture is consume and die. It's very much Brave New World without all of the sex and the drugs, without all the fun stuff. It's just the rest of Brave New World, and none of the gene editing or eugenics, but sort of. But this view of nature as an invariable constant that is at odds with the true nature of the material world, in which nothing is static and everything is always transforming. And small, often imperceptible quantitative changes over time can lead to qualitative shifts. And here you have a great example of how sometimes tempered glass will seemingly explode without warning, sort of explaining what's going on there, where it's like small changes that have happened in the glass that all kind of come together in this big effect all at once. And we read about a similar phenomena in the beginning of the book Surviving the Future, where there's sort of options about how we're going to embrace the changes that are coming to us. Because even setting aside climate change, we also still have biophysical economics. I'm very much in the mindset of biophysical economics. It goes beyond things like the labor theory of value and talks more about the energy theory of value, which is like how much energy does it actually take to produce this thing, and how much of that energy do we get a return on our investment from using it? How much of it is renewable or finite? Because things that take finite resources should be a lot more expensive than they actually are. And then we also have to think about the energy sort of economy of things. And peak oil is a thing. Energy return on investment, the net energy cliff. We've talked about these things before. That's a whole other issue that we got to think about as well simultaneously. And then Krellin, that's called a basement. Ice Bunny. Ice Bunny, you said, yeah, atom energy that will fuck over the planet, and it already happened. No, that's not the technological miracles I'm talking about. But atomic energy is also something where there has been a lot of breakthroughs, and a lot of the things that have gone wrong were caused by very particular issues that are very, very avoidable. And as Krellin is saying, none of those nuclear disasters were particularly disastrous. And then have you seen how green Chernobyl is these days? Hi, Jakey. How's it going? Waiting for ads. And then Ice Bunny, I guess the workers who were sent to Chernobyl not knowing what was going on and who died of radiation poisoning beg to differ. I mean, the thing is, though, things like solar power kill more people a year than any other power thing. Like the deaths per kilowatt hour. Let me even just look that up. Deaths per kilowatt hour energy sources. This is from 2012, but ResearchGate, and let me just see what this Forbes article is. Well, I hope you enjoy your lunch at work. And yet, I agree with you, Colin. Chernobyl was basically a deliberate fuck up. So let's just see here. Energy source. So per mortality rate, deaths per trillions kilowatt hours. So coal, for sure, one of the worst. Solar, rooftop solar, yeah, it's a lot more dangerous than nuclear power with Chernobyl and Fukushima. So number of people who die per kilowatt hour. So coal, oil, natural gas, these things are like the absolute worst, right? It's also one of the problems when people compare, electric vehicles to internal combustion vehicles and how much better they are, but it's still like you're comparing it to literally the worst thing possible, and we can do better. And here we can see, though, like solar, wind, all of these things kill a lot of people. And the thing is I think we tend to not feel as much fear around these energy sources because we're ourselves unlikely to be in a position to be killed by these sources of energy, aside from a lot of people die every year due to air pollution. And air pollution definitely affects every single one of us, but we have this sense of more control because it's like, well, I'm not a coal miner, or I don't work at a coal plant, or I'm not installing solar panels on rooftops and risking falls, etc. But Chernobyl is scary because what if I just lived near a nuclear power plant? I'm sort of more innocent and not involved in this, but it's like this is also one of the issues with our perception of danger and the locus of control, like when we feel we do and don't have control, and the idea of fear there. We should have so much fear around driving. We really should. Nobody is as good of a driver as they think they are. We're never as aware as we think we are. And you can't account for the behavior of other drivers. Even if you're an amazing driver, if somebody crosses over into your lane, they cross over into your lane, and there's nothing you can do about that. But we don't tend to feel the same kind of fear around driving as we do around flying, for example, because we don't have as much control over what's happening when flying. So even though the pilots and the air traffic controllers are all amazing at what they do and are doing a way better job than we would ever do in that position, we feel more afraid because we feel that something is outside of our control. Whereas statistically, it doesn't actually make that much sense. Now, for sure, the idea of dying in a plane crash is fucking terrifying. Like, I've thought a lot about that, like how much it would suck to be like, oh, the plane's crashing and I'm totally gonna die, but you have enough time to think about it. Yeah, that's not great, but I'm not afraid of being in a plane versus being in a car. Now, there is some math around, you know, travel hours and deaths per that, and like there's more debate about what's safer, flying or driving, sort of maybe, but yeah. And yes, you're right, Jakey. People falling off roofs is one of the primaries, but there's also the all the people who die mining to get out the things that we need to create solar panels, and the people who die as that's not even factored into this probably. The people who die because of the environmental impacts of the mining or are displaced and then have lower life expectancy because, you know, they're more affected by things like waterborne disease and things like that. Krellin. I agree with you. And Jakey, you say, imagine if we went back to pre-electric days. Araden, there are also more movies about nuclear disasters. Jakey, I would never go up a wind turbine. I lived next to a nuclear power plant my whole life and nothing happened. Driving is more dangerous than flying in trains. Ice Bunny, why does it always sound like people do not want to change? What exactly are you responding to, Ice Bunny? I'm not sure what part of what we're talking about, but I would love to know. Krellin, to be honest, we should just stop flying. I agree with you. Coal mining is so dangerous. And Jakey, probably the car lobbyists in the USA. Hopefully, we soon can find better materials for solar panels. And Rodden, for me, the issue was you also can stop a car and get out if you need to, whereas you can't just stop and get out of a plane. Except if you watch that video of like the person who ran through a cross traffic in LA recently, as soon as the cars got hit, they exploded in flames. I do and don't recommend looking at that video. It is incredibly upsetting and sad. And Krillin, I don't want to change because I already live an incredibly low impact life. And if everyone in the US lived like me, we would not be the world's top polluter. And I definitely understand that. I do think that there's always more ways that we could be better. Like I think about, obviously we're not going to individual solutions our way out of this. I always want to be like two yeses exist at the same time. Yes, you know, these energy companies are the biggest polluters in the world, responsible for most greenhouse gases. But the thing is, they're doing it to satisfy our demands for cheap fuel, fast transport, abundant things to buy, all food available all the time. Like these things are interdependent. And one of these problems can change partially through things like regulation, but they also have to change through our behaviors changing simultaneously. And there's a lot that has to go into that. So I do my best to always buy things in, say, glass bottles versus plastic bottles whenever I can, because glass is completely recyclable, whereas plastic is not. I do my best to buy things that don't come in packaging, like zero waste stuff. I like to get, I've moved away from buying like bottles of shampoo, and I go to things like Lush where you can get bars of shampoo, and then I have like tins that I keep it in that are reusable. And these are things where it does affect over the course of my lifetime. And we're not going to individual responsibility our way to those benefits, but policy shifts and different choices on the parts of manufacturers. Because the other problem is if you make it all this extra work for people, a lot of people don't have the time, the energy, the resources, the knowledge, whatever, to do any of that. And therefore, we have to also support making these things easy to the point of becoming more attractive. And Jake, you said you can jump out of a plane if you dare. Yes, exactly, Paladin Hulk. That's exactly right. They also tell us what our demands should be. So the consumer demands are things that we're also sort of being. It is very similar to Brave New World, right? If you've not read Brave New World, I recommend it. Where like we're just basically commanded to consume and told what to consume until we die. And Jakey, I'd love to figure out a way to make ships faster and more energy efficient. Yeah, I mean, wind powered ships are going to be more energy efficient in many ways, but we just don't ship as much or as quickly. Um, and yes, I agree, Jakey. I'd love to have. Um, yeah, I agree, Krellin. That's pretty sure you're going to have to pick one of those, Jakey. And then Jakey, you said I'd love to have refill machines for shampoo or laundry soap for the plastic bottles. Yeah. And I also agree. Refill things like in your area, if you're lucky, you might find a zero waste grocery store or market. And it's not perfect. It's not going to replace your grocery store for everything, but you can often get things like soap, shampoo, conditioner, body lotion that comes in big containers and you have to bring your own containers to fill it up. And it's really good because then you can reuse it. And same thing with cleaning liquids. Other things that you can do is you can make your own cleaning things. Like you can buy like big containers of like baking soda and lye and powdered bleach and all this other stuff. And then it's, even though you still have a big packet, you can get it so that it comes in like, you know, cardboard boxes or things that can be reused, like tubs where you can go back to the chemical manufacturer and say, hey, I give you my tub back, give me a new one. And then make your own cleaning things. Now, this takes time, and a lot of zero waste stores will have all of this already pre-made for you because this is one of the benefits of society is that we don't have to all do these things ourselves all the time. And I don't feel morally superior for doing these things. I do these things because it's more in line with my personal ethos and feels good internal consent for myself because I try to be as low impact as possible. And I try to be thoughtful about things around me. And I like to produce as little stuff as possible. And I like to consume as little stuff as possible. But does not make me feel better than other people. Yeah. So then here we have this article. There's also whatever. You can see here, this is a statistics website that has more information about deaths per kilowatt hour. Wind, rooftop solar, hydro, and then you can see coal, which is genuinely the worst. And then we also have ResearchGate with others. So we have a bunch of different sources that can tell you about deaths per kilowatt hour. And also percentage of global electricity. And I think it's nice to think about these. Okay, so we have here a little bit more information. This person wrote a poem, and this person also says, don't be disencouraged, frameworks for 21st century environmental justice. And they have a whole thread talking more about how to not be discouraged. So this is one of those things it's important to talk about this stuff, to have the actual facts, to know what's really going on so that you can go in and respond to things in ways that are not just because you feel overwhelmed and scared or like you're like, I want to make the environment a better place. And also we need to not become doomers. We can't become like, okay, the world's going to end. Might as well get drunk and party until it does. Like, no, there's so much we can do. And this here thread has a thread of a lot of really good things that we can do. A lot of really good things that we can do. They've been talking about land back, which is really important. And this makes me feel really good. And we can move to a circular economy. Circular economies are a really great alternative to capitalism. So one of the other things I really want to stress, I actually haven't, let me bring it up. Money creation in the modern economy. There's an article. Here it is. First result, Bank of England. This paper, when it came out, blew the minds of the finance and banking world everywhere. Money creation in the modern economy is, I got like a brain boner when I read this paper because even though it's nerdy, it talks about how almost all new money is made through the creation of debt, and that every time debt is paid back, money is lost. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but one of the things that's really important is this comes back to something I talked about months ago with the growth Ponzi scheme, about how we keep trying to grow our communities, our suburbs especially, and we build them in these ways that are really expensive and non-sustainable, have massive upkeep costs. But the other problem is, and if everything, all new money is basically being created through the creation of debt, that demands endless growth because you have to pay back debt. But debt is always more than the original thing that you borrowed. You have to pay back principal plus interest. And the only way that becomes possible is if everything keeps growing. And if we come back to this idea of like, okay, so then I built this strip mall that required all of this infrastructure to get to. I get very little tax revenue from this. And it has all of these upkeep and all this maintenance that the company that uses, this Target or whatever doesn't pay for. And then I also have to pay back this debt. You can see how very quickly the only way to not go into bankruptcy as a town is to keep growing, meaning you just keep borrowing more. It's like the same problem of someone who goes into debt and they borrow money from a loan shark and then they can't pay that money back. So in order to not get, killed by the loan shark, you go borrow money from another one, but you've only increased your problems. And this is one of the reasons why this paper caused huge waves, because this means that if we want to change a lot of global inequality, climate change, all these other things, we're going to have to be aware of all of the looming problems. And Ice Bunny, you said the Danish dude whose name I still cannot remember, looked at statistics and concluded by looking at statistics that climate change is not a thing, so be careful with them. He was statistically right or not wrong, but reality shows he is wrong. Yeah, for sure. I mean, also like, you can abuse statistics. I mean, a lot of science is abuse statistics, and like I should also let you know that like people who do things like currency forecasting or economic forecasting, the models that they use are just things they stole from physics. So that was what physics was a long time, but now to forecast economically, a lot of big organizations, banks, central banks, etc., financial institutions, they're using epidemiological models now because they're like, well, we plug the numbers in and we get a number out. So fantastic. And technically that's statistics. And look, we did some things and we programmed and look, it's so fancy and machine learning, but they're just using epidemiological models and it doesn't make any sense. And the thing is a lot of the economy, as you know, is a fantasy about how much do people believe in the economy. And yet this is what runs our world. And we're not even doing something like the labor theory of value, let alone the energy theory of value. And yeah, that's all I have to say. And Krellin, you say, I mean, if you stretch the stats out to the Precambrian When O2 levels were twice what they are today and bugs were the size of crocodiles, sure, our climate change is a bump, but that is also both stupid and lying. Yes, absolutely. I really want to encourage you all to read this. It is a little bit difficult, a little bit dense. Some of these tables take time to understand. But there have been people, I'm sure, out there who've written guides to understanding this because this article is so important. Everyone needs to understand this because politicians talk about things all the time. And especially here, as it even brings up, this is where I want to scroll to, talking about monetary policy and how misinformed a lot of decisions that people are making related to monetary policy is basing our understanding of money creation off of things that we don't do anymore. And this really affects a lot of things. And it's really important to understand exactly what's going on here. Please read it. So I'm going to stress. Okay, so we've got this article here that talks a lot about other options. Degrowth is one as well. There's a lot of things that we can do. Jake, you said lobbying in the USA kind of makes it hard for good policy to happen. Yeah, well, this is why we could also create, there are citizens lobbying groups, and we could work on those, and we could work on, say, changing campaign finance law, or even lobbying law, or like there's a lot of things we could work on. One of the other things, I'm not going to talk about it now, we didn't even game today. The illusionary truth effect, I think is also important to read it. The illusionary truth effect is the idea that the more you're exposed to false information, you tend to believe it to be correct at some point. And this plus the shifting baseline effect can also really work together. And it's really important to, I agree, Jakey, Citizens United has got to be changed 1,000%. So if our baseline shifts and then some of how that baseline shifts is false information, but we take it to be intrinsically true because it's always been that way or always been true, that makes a lot of things, imagining different and better futures, harder. It also makes imagining how things can go wrong harder. And this also has an effect on consent. If I'm always used to doing X thing as being good and giving me a good time or pleasure, or there's no problems, or I have fun, then when I'm starting to do the same thing with, say, a newer, less experienced person, I might not remember the caution that should be taken or the information this person needs to know. So anyway, here's an article. I'm going to put the Twitter link in the chat, but also the article link in the chat. This is from @AlexStefan. We found that the overall upfront cost to replace all energy in the 145 countries which emit 99.7% of world CO2 is about $62 trillion. However, due to $11 trillion annual energy cost savings, the payback time for the new system is less than 6 years. So this is from The Hill. Here, this person adds, of course, if you do any sort of reality-based accounting for the true costs of climate and ecological destruction, large-scale and rapid transformations don't just pay for themselves and increase prosperity. They save us many more trillions of dollars in avoided losses. This is the other thing. People talk about climate change being expensive to face. It'll be more expensive the longer we wait, and it'll be more expensive. It's more expensive the longer we wait. And once the effects start. So we have this article from The Hill, and I'll put this also in the chat. No miracle needed. No miracle tech needed. How to switch to renewables now and lower costs doing it. And this article is really, really positive because it talks about how we already have the technologies we need to face at least energy emission climate change related problems. There are other problems related to climate change that we need to face, and just changing our electrical grids will not completely solve everything, but it will solve a lot of things, and how we could do that. I agree with you, Krellin. The Hill is such a fascinating publication. It's full of both the best and the worst takes. So, and you get like random articles like Alec Baldwin compares whatever, whatever. Like, I don't care. But this article is very interesting. I'm not going to read it now because there's two other articles I want to talk about, and then I will need to get going soon. Never even played a game. But I want to stress that there's a lot. I think that this is good here that it links to information from the WHO about the 7 million air pollution deaths per year worldwide. I also will put that link in the chat because it's important to recognize we don't have any control over that, right? This is one of those things where we think about, oh, I'm so afraid of nuclear power. And there's discussions to be had in good faith about pros and cons related to nuclear power. There's a lot that has changed since the days of Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl. Those plants, all of the problems that happened there are avoidable things. Nuclear waste management has changed dramatically. In fact, more modern fuels produce less waste. Most of the danger is just when you turn the reactor on the first time. You only have to do the dangerous thing once, but to do things like put solar panels on roofs, you have to do the dangerous thing many, 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 many times. For each person who does that work, there are lots of things to think about. And then you also have the knock-on effects of things like premature deaths linked to air pollution. This is something that we should have more movies about and big HBO shows that show, like HBO's Chernobyl. The things that it got right were basically how and why the reactor did what it did and the ways in which the government covered it up. The people like bleeding out of that's not how you die of radiation poisoning. That's so stupid. Like, it just made radiation seem like, you know, a invisible monster that rips you up from the inside. I mean, in some ways you can think of it that way, but like the dramatization of like what happened with Chernobyl makes me sad because it's in some ways wrapped up in particular sort of like fears of Slavic people and, you know, the East and people who are not capitalists and all this other stuff. And then we don't have movies with that high production value talking about air pollution as a result of coal. And we should. We don't talk about how food grown near roadways, where it's like you've probably driven on highways past farms. Hey, all the food that's grown near a highway basically shouldn't be eaten because you've got everything from all of the exhaust, the stuff coming off tires, things that the cars were transporting that gets into the food. And a lot of that's really highly carcinogenic. And like radiation gives you cancer, but so does all these pollutants that are in the corn that was grown next to the highway. And like we don't have a good sense of fear because of this idea of the where control is located. And we tend to think that I'm making personal choices, therefore I'm safer, or like I don't see the threat, therefore it doesn't really feel like there is one. Whereas like Chernobyl feels so scary, airplane crashes feel so scary, but air pollution and car accidents, we don't think that much about them. Because we also have been taught, because of this shifting baseline problem, to see those deaths as normal and inevitable when they don't have to be. They don't have to be. Um, yeah. So then here, going back, okay, Aradin, but people love the idea of the miracle tech sigh, as that way they don't have to actually work on anything. Krellin, fuck Elon Musk in particular. Aradin, definitely. Krellin, cult leader of the quote tech will save us cult. And Aradin, or more specifically, my tech will save us. Yeah. Ice Bunny, they still dump it into not that safe mines and places like 411. Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, so I'm going to read what Krell said. A lot of the problem is that everyone got so afraid of nuclear power that old inferior technology plants haven't been allowed to be replaced by newer, safer technology. Ice Bunny. Fukushima was probably the worst location for the worst design of a nuclear plant. Yeah, like my grandfather was a nuclear engineer, and he helped design the nuclear power plant that was in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And it was the sister plant to the Fukushima plant. And my grandfather, when that disaster was happening, was calling me every day, just like pissed off about like the corruption that was clearly happening, the lack of maintenance, some of the other decisions that were being done, how the whole thing could have been avoided if they hadn't made these terrible decisions, that there was the only reason why they would have done this was for corruption purposes. My grandfather actually like tried to go to Japan because he's like, I know how to like help fix this reactor and stop these things. I designed that reactor. Like I designed the one in Plymouth and this is the sister of it. And like they didn't bring him in obviously because he was like in his late 80s and they were like, not good, dude, we're good. But he had a lot of opinions about how what happened at Fukushima should have never happened, even based on the science we had in the 50s and 60s. We knew better than that. And yeah. Um, and then Ice Bunny, you say, have you heard the accounts of the experience of I think you mean the Hibakshas, like the people who survived the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Is that what you mean? And then Krellin says no, because personal anecdotes are a bad way to view safety. I would also say that people who survived nuclear bombs are not a good way of talking about nuclear energy. The two things are incredibly different, and the uh, experiences that you would have as someone who survives a nuclear bomb versus a nuclear meltdown are really not comparable, even though they both have the word nuclear in them. Anyway, this article here, I really want to encourage you all to read it because it talks very, very nicely about how we do not need miracle technologies to solve these problems. By electrifying all energy sectors, producing electricity from clean renewable sources, creating heat, cold, and hydrogen from such electricity, storing electricity, heat, cold, and the hydrogen, expanding transmission, and shifting the time of some electricity use, we can create safe, cheap, and reliable energy everywhere. But the thing is, one of the other things is I want to think about like, when do we need to reach net zero? When are we predicted? Basically 2050. So we have about 30 years to reach net zero. And then I want to think about how long does it take for a new technology to get funded, researched, proven to be effective, proven to be safe, brought online with prototypes, and then how long would it take for completely new technologies to be disseminated everywhere? We don't have the time for that. We have to basically continue to try to find new things, continue to do research for sure, but focus on we have the solutions already. We have things that we can do. We can do more circular economics. We can degrow our energy usage. We can make things more local. We can change some of our lifestyle, but we can also change our energy sources to technologies that are already proven effective, that we already know how to do, that we already have the resources for, and start doing that now. Because if you think about the timelines of these things, it becomes really clear we don't have time to wait for a new miracle technology, because even if one came along, the likelihood that it would be rolled out across the entire planet between now and 2050. And then also, because the thing is it's not just the idea is not we continue as we are until 2050 and then suddenly stop all of these emissions. No, the idea is starting now, we need to be dramatically decreasing emissions and reach net zero by 2050, not everything stays the same and then drops. So we need to be already replacing things that emit a lot of greenhouse gases now. We cannot wait until later. So this is one of the other reasons why waiting for a miracle technology to come along is really not going to work. Yeah, and Krellin, you've said here, nuclear power is basically just a really fancy steam reactor, but yes, things require maintenance. All nuclear disasters are people trying to cut corners and save money, face some other currency. 3 Mile Island isn't a disaster. It was an example of the safety measures working. And I agree with all of these things. And Erodin, yes, but then the billionaires won't make even more money. The horror, heavy biting sarcasm. I mean, this is one of the other things is if we're not beholden to growth and profit, a lot of these things that motivate us to cut corners, to lie. I mean, a lot of what happened with Chernobyl was a failure of leadership and a failure of information being communicated, right? And so because people needed to save face, it's because people didn't want to lose their job. If we change the motivation structures around a lot of these things, we won't run into these problems as much. So we already have the technology to do the things we need to do. We just have to do it. And continuing, there's 2 articles I really want to share, not this one, these 2. So this is about some direct action that we can do. So this here is not this video. This video is not totally related. It's an article with a lot of really good resources in it and links talking about urban gardeners creating Black food sovereignty in New Orleans and how you can create more food sovereignty and more food security and help reduce things like food deserts through this type of direct action and collaboration with other people. And there are probably already people in your area doing this that you could join in on. So if you want to have more accessible, nutritious food for less money and make sure everybody in your community has access to that too and is fed and is nourished, then there's a lot that you can do. And urban gardening is not perfect, obviously, because of the pollution issues we talked about, but it also goes away to helping with some of that pollution. The more plants that we have, the better. The other one here is a pretty long article from Resilience that I really recommend as well. And this is about mutual aid organizations that both started before COVID and or arose during COVID, and mutual aid organizers also interacting with each other and empowering each other and doing, cross sort of not facilitation, but just like cheerleading, basically, and how important that is. And I really, really recommend this article because it's also very, very hopeful. And these 2 articles here about different types of mutual aid. Because the thing is mutual aid is something that can also exist alongside, say, the efforts of something like FEMA or any like disaster response organization within a government, but they're going to be what they're going to be able to do and who they're going to focus on is going to be not everybody, right? There's going to be people missed. There's going to be things that can't be accounted for. And these are usually people from outside of the community coming in, bringing a sort of one size fits all solution to try to help the most number of people as efficiently as possible. That's not a bad thing, but smaller organizations, local things that have relationships with people, that know where people are, how to reach out to them. If I just go knock on the door of some old person who's maybe at risk of dying in a heat wave, if I don't already have a relationship with them and know how to build trust and are they actually going to tell me if they're having any of symptoms of heat stroke? Are they going to be willing to come to a cooler place with me? Are they going to be willing to let me even check in on them? I need to have a relationship there. If I'm just some random FEMA worker and I'm coming in and I just seem like I'm from the government, well, they might have good reasons to not want to answer their door, and then they're at higher risk. Whereas if I've already embedded myself in a community, I have trust, I know who people are, I know their names, or even if I don't know their names, I know about them, I'm going to be able to do a lot more. And I'm also going to be able to be a lot more nourished by the activism that I do. It's going to give back to me because I'm going to build these relationships. I'm going to build these connections. And I think that these mutual aid organizations are a real powerhouse of this. And one of the reasons why I also want to share this is because I want to really stress that there is so much that we can do already. You can donate time, you can donate money, you can donate knowledge, you can raise awareness. There's lots of different ways. Like a lot of you have talked about being recluses. You don't have to change that to make a difference. You can do things like contact them and ask them about volunteering that is entirely digital. A lot of them will have that, including like, we need someone to help write grants. We need someone to help write our mailing list. We need people to help do social media promotion. We need this, that, and the other. These are all things that you can do, even if it's just like, okay, I can, send out emails from an account that is not identified with me, once a month to X number of people, you would still be likely helping. And, or like, I can do some graphic design, give me access to your, I forget what the website is where people do all the graphic design stuff now. I can do some of that. I can do, 15 images a month. Just tell me what you need and I'll work on it. There are lots of different things that you can do. And I want to stress that this also is stuff that is going to help you. If even if you don't need that motivation, your community around you being more resilient and more able to sort of like handle disruptions in how things go, more able to sort of like support each other in times of difficulty, the better off you're going to be as well. And here there's a lot of, they talk about different organizations that have different organizational structures, different groups that they serve. They compare a bunch of different orgs: survival program, defend the forest movement. They also have like mutual aid, disaster relief, Richmond, all of these different orgs. And they talk about, it's very good. And I want to give you this article because it's very helpful. And there's also this, which is something that came across my Twitter recently, even though it's an old article, which is just about fantasy books by Native American authors, and loosely talking about J.K. Rowling because she made some racist shit for Pottermore. And then I haven't read this article yet, but I'm excited for it. This one is about integrating climate change into our sense of self, which is also a really exciting article. And then there was one other, but I guess I closed it. Then the last one is one I will actually share, which is why you shouldn't travel to Hawaii. That's all. Don't do it. Arata Nu said, we need to start caring about other people rather than just ourselves. We have developed such an us versus them, or something good for someone else means that something good isn't for me mentality, rather than a taking care of others is taking care of ourselves mentality. Exactly. And we also tend to have a big aspect of binary bias, where we tend to think things are either or, where a lot of things are yes and, or yes but, or no and, or no but. And there's a lot of options beyond just it's either this or this. And it's really important for us to be able to identify binary bias in our thinking around these things. Like, either the future is going to be beautiful and shiny and technology will save us, or we're already doomed and we might as well give up trying. No. Things are going to be difficult in some ways, and a lot of difficulties are preventable. We can make the world a better place while also providing for climate change, or like accounting for climate change. There's so much that we can do. Anyway, let's stop here for today. We talked about a lot of good things. Thank you for reading this thread with me, talking about some other big issues, and getting into it a bit more. There's a lot of direct action that we can do. There's so many ways that we can do things to help with climate change. You can also become part of organizations that go and help remove invasive plants and go for walks. You can help rewild places. There's a really good video I want to share with you all that was about rewilding Iceland. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, it's got to be this this group here, Reforesting Iceland. They're talking about how what rewilding looks like, what it is, how that works, and then how exactly they're doing it, what percent. So Iceland has almost no forest cover because of sheep farming and herding that started all the way back in the Viking Age, and a lot of clear cutting of forests to extract the resources from Iceland to enrich the rest of basically the Scandinavian countries at the time, and how the people who live in Iceland are then having difficulties because of that, because you also have a lot of desertification because you don't have things protecting the soil. And as these winds whip across, they pull more nutrients out, they dry things out, they pull the soil up and expose the rocky stuff underneath. Things are becoming more deserts. This is another video to watch related to this. Rewilding is something you can be a part of. That will really help you can even just rewild your yard. If you want a good guide on how that works, look at Jeff Vandermeer, the author who wrote the Annihilation book series. If you've seen the movie Annihilation on Netflix, it's one of my favorite movies of all time and also one of my favorite book series of all time. And I got to meet Jeff Vandermeer and ask him questions, and he liked my questions, and I feel a lot of pleasure about that. He has rewilded his yard in Florida, and it's created an amazing biodiversity hub. And he posts a lot about the process, a lot about, all of the critters that he gets to, experience, and the real benefit it's given to this region in Florida where he lives. There are tons and tons of things you can do. You can also do things like write letters and do protests related to development that will, is unnecessary. Don't let people build more strip malls, no more stroads. Fight against those things. You can also get involved by going to things like school board meetings, right? We want to make sure that the generation that's going to be taking care of us when we're old isn't a bunch of assholes and idiots, right? I mean, you all know that I am a stupid people's rights advocate, but there's difference between being stupid and being an idiot, right? Like not knowing stuff and then being very confident in the stuff that you don't know and like hurting people as a result or causing problems for others is not the same thing as things are a little harder for you to understand. And anyway, we should care about even if you don't have children, you should care about education because that affects everything. And then there's so many different ways. And the thing is, as I mentioned everyone that you pick to work on affects every other thing. So you don't have to try to do all of them at once. Pick one or two that you like, that fit with your lifestyle, fit with your comfort zone, are going to make you feel good for doing them, and then do it. And do it as much as you want, as much as you have capacity for. And it's okay if you then don't doom scroll or doom read the news because you got your stuff you're focusing on and you're making good changes. And I really believe in all of us. Anyway, let's stop here. I said I was going to stop and then I kept talking. Anyway, it's been lovely. Thank you all for joining me. I feel very rejuvenated from today's chat. And I will talk to you all on Sunday. It's probably going to be me and Ash talking about part 2 on relationship agreements, about what to do when things go wrong in relationships or when a relationship agreement is broken. And I agree with you, Rodden. It's also why I'm sad about how disrespected teachers are. Anyway, thank you all. Have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you on Sunday. Bye.